Before we get on with the video, I've got a couple important things to announce that I'd recommend listening to instead of skipping past the Invincible portion of the video. The first is that for the past week, Amazon has been blocking me from uploading this video. It's only until now have I found a way that lets me upload the video without any issue at all. So throughout the video, if you see this image on screen, it's not an editing mistake. It's something that I've done to prevent a takedown from YouTube or Amazon. Secondly, this video talks about in detail some pretty graphic and disturbing topics. And while it is all fictional, I understand that there are people out there who still find those subjects triggering nonetheless. And finally, while I'd never do this in any of my other videos, I'm only doing it here because of how long the video is and the amount of effort I put into it. Which is, if you could like, subscribe, or join my Discord in the link down below, then I would greatly appreciate it. It feels awkward doing this at the beginning, but with the amount of effort I put into this video, I feel as if it's warranted. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of the video. About a year ago, I made a video covering Invincible Season 2, more specifically about its underlying theme of trauma present throughout the story and its characters. Looking back on it now, the way I initially presented my video was pretty vague. I kept mentioning how trauma defined the characters throughout the season, when I probably should have specified more, and said that it was about generational trauma and family trauma instead. The reason I bring this up now is because this video is a direct continuation of my previous video on Invincible, and if you haven't seen it, then I highly recommend that you do now, as I reference moments from that video in this one. But if you don't want to, then that's also fine, as you should still be able to follow along just as well despite the occasional piece of missing context. Something else I want to mention quickly before we start is that the structure of this video is going to be a little different compared to the previous one. Last video, my sole focus was on Mark, Debbie, and Nolan. However, in this video, it's nearly impossible not to talk about the other characters, as they are all interconnected to Mark's character arc this season. So while we will still be talking about Mark, Debbie, and Nolan, we'll also be talking about Rex, Eve, Cecil, and Oliver. These characters have different arcs and themes, like the desire for normalcy or redemption, but all of them contribute in some way to the main topic of our video, which is Mark's desperation for self-control, or lack thereof, that permeates throughout the season, affecting every character in some way. So without further wait, since this video is long enough as is, let's jump in. In Season 2, we ended on quite a depressing but slightly hopeful note, where Mark is left shaken from the incident with Angstrom Levy. He talks about how he needs to be better and to learn how to control himself. This means that he'll have to commit more of his time to the superhero lifestyle and take on fewer responsibilities than he did in Season 2. Which is partly why he stops himself from dating Eve at the end of the season. Not only is he not ready for the responsibility of being in a relationship, but Mark has also been through a severely traumatic incident, and would rather not burden her with that when he's not mentally ready yet. In Season 3, we begin on a slightly different note, getting shown how much Mark has improved, and is doing a lot better mentally in contrast to how he was in the Season 2 finale. He's stronger, faster, more durable, and still has incredibly bad geography skills.
I could have done it faster, but I got lost on the way back again.
However, as Mark is getting stronger, that doesn't mean his villains aren't either. As we find out later on, villains like Doc Seismic are now able to kidnap all the superheroes across the world, and the Mauler twins are creating weaponry that can nearly knock superheroes out with a single blast. What's even more difficult is that Mark has to hold back his true power during these fights, because of how scared he is of losing control, and doesn't want it to happen again like it did with Angstrom. As the title card for the show plays, we see the colors switch around a bit, showing that Mark's morals this season are going to get flipped around as well, setting up for him to lose control and thus losing himself when he kills Conquest at the end of the season. Of course, this title card also foreshadows the Invincible War, with each title card throughout the season matching the colors of each Invincible variant. Speaking of the Invincible War, what I thought about a lot was the backstory behind a majority of the Invincible variants, and how weak compared to Mark they all are. You see, throughout the season, but this montage especially, we see Mark working out and pushing himself to the limit. With the variants, since all of them are evil, most of them destroyed their world, so they themselves were likely never challenged or need to work out, as they are Viltrumites and can tenfold Earth's power. Because of this, a majority of them are lazy, entitled, have serious mental issues, or all of the above. As Mark trains harder, we get some interesting foreshadowing. Cecil asks Donald if Mark is strong enough to beat Anissa, to which he responds with a hesitant yes, but continues saying that she implied that someone much worse was coming their way. This of course is a nod to Conquest, who comes at the end of the season, and Cecil continues saying that that's why they aren't stopping with Mark or any of their other future plans. These plans that Cecil refers to likely have something to do with the Reaniman, Darkwing, and the noise frequencies inside of Mark's head, which will be expanded upon later on. In the meantime, Mark and Rex head out to stop someone called Dropkick and Fightmaster from stealing the
Declaration of Independence. What?
This entire fight is meant to display how strong and durable Mark is, but also how distant he's been to the people around him. While we don't get an exact time frame of how long it's been, we do have Rex saying that it has been months since he talked to Eve in the Season 2 finale. As he eggs Mark on to ask her out, since they clearly like each other, Mark proceeds to ask Rex why he even wants this to happen, seeing how they used to date. Rex responds in a surprisingly mature manner, saying that he only cares about seeing his friends happy. It doesn't matter that he used to date her. If Mark and Eve are happy, that's all that matters to him. This development has been continued from last season, where Rex has been on a self-improvement journey ever since he got shot in the head. Rex has realized how much of an asshole he's been, not only to the women he has dated, but to everyone around him, and he doesn't want to be that person anymore. He wants to be better and to not let his past define him. This is Rex's development this season. While last season was more of a prelude into Rex's journey to self-improvement, this season heavily focuses on Rex repurposing his trauma into something better that can help people, and this scene alone establishes that perfectly. However, before Rex's pep talk with Mark can continue, their fight is unexpectedly interrupted by Duplicate's sister Multi-Pole, who is deluded into believing that Rex killed Ray, and is beaten to near death because of this. In the moment, Mark is forced to do something that he'll unfortunately be doing a lot this season, which is killing another person. While Multi-Pole is technically okay, since they're all clones of each other, that still doesn't make Mark any less comfortable with the situation. The whole reason he's doing this in the first place is because he needs to control himself, to stop himself from ever killing anyone else again. So when he's forced to do something like this, it's clear it takes a massive toll on Mark. The fight is then broken up by Kate revealing that she's not actually dead, but she's alive, surprise surprise, causing her brother to calm down a bit more. But he still tries to attack Rex nonetheless, and Mark is having none of it. Mark isn't letting Multi-Pole off the hook because of the mistake he made. In Mark's mind, he's a criminal and has to be locked in jail. This sets up another conflict that Mark has to work on throughout the season, which is his black and white philosophy on criminals needing to change, and that not all of them are inherently evil or deserve to be in prison. However, because of the situation with Levy, it's understandable that Mark's perspective on criminals has changed into a more strict method of handling them. After the fight, Mark goes home and hangs out with Oliver using a baseball glove. The same baseball glove that Nolan would use to connect with Mark, but it goes deeper than that. The baseball glove is a reminder of Nolan's first time feeling joy and connecting to humanity. Nolan playing catch with Mark reminds him of what the joys in life are all about and how precious they are, which in a way is the same for Mark. He needs those bits of human connection outside of being a superhero. Otherwise he'll get bogged down with the hard parts of being a hero, like the bad guys getting away, or not being able to save someone in time, or needing to make the hard decisions. Yes, Mark wants to focus on being the best Invincible he can be, but in order to do that, he needs to have a personal life in order to keep in touch with his human side. Whether that be playing catch with his brother, or going bowling with William, this type of thing grounds Mark. Speaking of which, Mark later hangs out with William and his boyfriend Rick, where he tells them about his situation with Eve and what happened in the desert when he met her future self. Rick and William both advise Mark not to tell Eve about what happened in the desert, but Mark isn't so sure. He doesn't want to lie to her from the get-go like he did with Amber, or most importantly, like his father did to Debbie. But the main takeaway that Mark gets from their conversation is that he shouldn't wait any longer, because if he does, he'll learn to regret it as life can change in an instant, which is definitely true when it comes to the world of Invincible. So the next day arrives, and Mark decides that this will be the day where he asks her out. And it's neat seeing superheroes like Mark getting more nervous over normal everyday activities than fighting aliens. The superhero lifestyle is usually so ingrained into their routine that they forget all about the regular mundanity of everyday life. As they both catch up with each other, we find out that Eve is now taking college courses on architecture and engineering, which is a cool payoff from last season when she tried helping out with the Chicago incident, and it slowly fell apart. However, despite everything, you can tell that things are awkward between the two. They're getting along, sure, but there's an air of awkwardness that needs to be cleared, so Eve asks Mark what he's actually doing here, and Mark all but confesses. Although he maybe confesses a bit too much, as he accidentally lets it slip about future Eve. Eve obviously doesn't take this well, and before Mark even has the chance to explain, Cecil calls about an emergency. It's Doc Seismic. He has captured every superhero on Earth and is planning to kill them. It's a very generic Saturday morning cartoon supervillain plan, to the point where even the show itself acknowledges how ludicrously cartoonish the plan is when Eve calls him a generic mad scientist. But what stops this from being a random villain of the week event is the revelation that comes from this battle when Cecil has no other choice but to send down the Reaniman and Darkwing to help out when everyone has been captured. You can almost feel the confusion and anger within Mark when he sees them battling Seismic's henchmen. He is filled with rage and starts attacking the Reaniman and Darkwing. He later finds out that Cecil is the reason that they are free and not in prison, proceeding to say that he knows that this is wrong and that he knows what is best. Mark doesn't care that they are reformed and acknowledges that his mother warned him about working for him ever since the beginning of Season 2. Eve tries to calm him down, but he's so angry that he can't be reasoned with. So he leaves to find Cecil, but not without apologizing to Eve first about earlier. Mark goes to the GDA headquarters to confront him, where Cecil argues that Darkwing and Sinclair are better utilized on the field to own up to their mistakes rather than rotting away in a prison cell. Mark is so frustrated and angry that he can't even comprehend Cecil's logic, and responds to it by saying,
"What are you even talking about?"
To which Cecil lets out a groan, possibly out of frustration and knowing that he was exactly like this back in the day. As the conversation continues with not much progression, Cecil decides to compare Mark to Darkwing and Sinclair by saying that he killed Angstrom, and that if he should be treated the same way as Mark thinks Sinclair and Darkwing should be treated. This, while being very in character for Cecil, is a very poor argument on his part. Not only does this make Mark overreact more, but his situation is completely different compared to Sinclair and Darkwing, to which Mark even calls him out on it. Cecil gives him a few more chances for him to leave before he does something he regrets, but Mark isn't having any of it. He refuses to leave until Darkwing and Sinclair are back in prison. Cecil sees that this isn't going anywhere, so he leads him into the White Room, where the Reaniman are, as the episode comes to a close. Which begs the question, who is in the right here? Well, the answer to that question may come as a surprise to many of you, so let's break it down. Throughout the series, Mark has always had quite a naive black and white perspective on the world. That is, if you are a bad guy, then you should go to prison. Whereas Cecil is a bit more complex. He's not an inherently evil individual, but his goal is that he will sacrifice anything and everything in order for humanity to be safe. The genius about this feud is that these two characters are polar opposites. Neither are in the middle. They are both stubborn in their very extremist viewpoints. And it's reasonable that they both feel that way. Mark is still a teenager. He has barely even begun to explore the complexities of what could be right or wrong. All he knows is that if you're committing a crime, then you deserve to be locked away. This outlook that Mark has was reinforced further when he decided to help Titan in Season 1, Episode 5. In the episode, Titan attempts to give Invincible a new outlook on the world he inhabits, which is the stuff he can't see in the sky. This episode actually manages to help Mark realize that there's a whole new layer about the criminal underworld that Mark wasn't even aware of before. And you get tricked into thinking that by the end of the episode, Mark will learn a valuable lesson about how important it is to help out the little guy. However, the show decides to subvert that expectation by not only showing that Mark learns practically nothing by the end of the episode, but his viewpoint on criminals and how to handle them are now more extreme than they were at the start. This is not a happy ending. It shows how emotion can cloud Mark's judgment from seeing the bigger picture and refuses to see it because he got betrayed by the person he tried to help. This mindset Mark has is challenged and explored in later episodes, like the circumstances behind why someone is committing a crime are varied, and could be for more sympathetic reasons. Mark's philosophy is blatantly childish, and that much is even confirmed earlier in the episode when he outright says that he doesn't need to know everything to know when something is wrong. The situation is also not helped by the fact that Mark is a superpowered being who is getting extremely emotional instead of trying to properly hear Cecil's perspective. Of course, when I say this, I understand that Mark is feeling betrayed and hurt by Cecil for keeping this from him, and that's pretty reasonable. If anyone were in Mark's situation, they'd probably act the same way. This doesn't mean that Cecil is off the hook either, though. I think Mark would have been a lot more understanding in this situation if Cecil had told him immediately what he was planning on doing with Darkwing and Sinclair. While obviously he'd still be a bit pissed, he definitely wouldn't be reacting to this degree. Part of the reason why Mark is even acting this way to begin with is due to the fact that a lot of his trust in Cecil has been broken. Yes, he disagrees with what he's doing, but the fact that Cecil hid it from him is more telling to Mark than anything. Cecil clearly doesn't trust Mark entirely, not to mention that he is also scared of him, not only because of what he's capable of, but who he's related to. Because of this, it creates a massive trust imbalance in the relationship, causing both sides to never fully trust the other. Which, in order for a partnership or team to function, it needs to be built on trust. However, where Cecil really went wrong was trying to control Mark with force. It makes sense why he would, because Cecil is scared of Mark, but like I pointed out in my Season 2 video, he's also a massive control freak and likes to remain in power. Usually, when Mark disobeys Cecil's orders, he tries to control Mark by manipulating him, but as that has become more ineffective as time passes, he decides to do what Radcliffe did to him, which is extreme punishment. But rather than this keeping Mark in line, it pushes him further away from Cecil. So while I'd say that Cecil is as justified in this situation as Mark is, the show does support Cecil's outlook more as the season progresses, where Mark slowly realizes that not all criminals should be locked away, and that the circumstances are different for every case. However, just because Mark comes to this conclusion doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows, as Mark still carries that childish mindset at the end of the season, just for a different philosophy. That being, if anyone threatens the people he loves or cares about, he will kill them. This is not a good ending for the season, it's extremely dark and foreboding, and what makes it worse is that Mark's perspective was changed by a kid who is younger than he is. But as a whole, while the show treats Cecil's perspective as being the mindset that is more objectively correct, the show will also point out that the way he goes about it is as equally as bad as how Mark handles it.
We can be the good guys, or we can be the guys that save the world. We can't be both.
In my previous video, I briefly touched upon Cecil's character, and how he would mainly try to manipulate Mark into doing what he wants by comparing him to his father. I didn't expand upon his characterization more because I only wanted to talk about the scenes that were relevant to Mark's character arc. But in Season 3, all of his scenes, especially his backstory, are all connected to Mark, to the point where they even parallel younger Cecil, being extremely similar to Mark in their ideologies. Seeing how there's a lot of Cecil content in Season 3, this segment will be a little bit lengthy, so keep that in mind as we jump into it. At the beginning of Season 3, we are shown Oliver finally getting his powers. Cecil was made aware of this because he's keeping tabs on Mark and his family. What happened with Omni-Man, and how he likes to be a step ahead, it makes sense that he would still keep his house surveilled just in case Mark or Oliver decide to turn evil. Since Oliver has gotten his powers, and is still only a kid, this rightfully worries Cecil, as there are potential risks that come with being a kid with powers. Cecil decides to pay Debbie a visit and expresses his disappointment that she didn't tell him about Oliver's newfound powers. Debbie states that he found out anyway, to which Cecil tries to gaslight her about trusting each other. Of course, Debbie never agreed to this, and she points that out to Cecil. However, Cecil tries a different approach by telling her that she and her children are part of the superhero lifestyle, to which Debbie responds by saying that her responsibility will always be to her family first, and that will never change. This is a partial setup to what Debbie's arc will be like, that eventually she will have to learn that Earth counts as one of those responsibilities too, whether she likes it or not. Cecil tries convincing Debbie to let him train Oliver and test him, because like I said before, he's scared of Oliver and what he could become if he isn't the one keeping him in check, as he thinks that he is the only one for the job. I mentioned earlier in the video about how much of a control freak Cecil is, and that part of him is on full display in this scene, and Debbie sees right through it. He even claims to Debbie that with Oliver he could help him understand and control his powers. Debbie knows what that could entail, and refuses to let her son be a test subject for a government facility. Cecil sees that Debbie is clearly not budging, so he tries implementing a common tactic that Cecil uses, which is guilt tripping. He continues to do it quite a bit at the start of Season 3, with Mark and now with Debbie. Both of the times when he tried this approach on Mark and Debbie, it failed miserably. However, that doesn't mean Debbie is entirely unsympathetic to what Cecil is trying to do. She understands that Cecil has a duty to carry out, but that also means that he would sacrifice her children in a heartbeat if that meant saving the world. This continuous pattern in Cecil's behavior raises an important question. What happened to Cecil that transformed him into the man he is today? Throughout the show, Cecil has always been quite reserved about himself, which makes sense. In order for him to be good at his job, he has to be good at keeping to himself in a lot of ways, which only makes him more intriguing as a character. Thankfully, Season 3's second episode, aptly titled, A Deal with the Devil, answers this question. In the episode, Cecil is tasked with finding and stopping a group called the Order of the Freeing Fist, which is run by two insane individuals called Forced Fist and Knucklebuster. Their plan is that they want to poison the world, and the ones that survive will be lucky, as they will be the ones who will now appreciate the life they have. As Cecil tries to stop them, the two manage to activate the gas, and as Cecil tries to stop it from spreading, he is hit with the gas and left with all of his skin practically melted off. Unfortunately, despite Cecil's efforts, the gas did spread far enough that it killed a few people. Radcliffe comments on this, saying that a few people is a better outcome than most of the world. However, this incident affects him so much that when he gets most of his skin grafts on, he keeps the only piece of skin that was left intact from the incident as a reminder to never forget what happened. This is where the parallels to Mark start to come in, where they both blame themselves if even one person dies on the job that they weren't able to save. A few months later, the White House is being attacked by the Lizard League. Cecil is then overpowered by one of the members, Komodo Dragon, only to see Forced Fist and Knucklebuster still alive. After everything that Cecil had been through, all the lives they had taken, Cecil shared Mark's philosophy and said that they should be in prison or dead, whereas the director says that they are making up for their mistakes, only for Cecil to express his gratitude by killing both Forced Fist and Knucklebuster. Of course, this doesn't end well for Cecil, because after the title card we cut to Cecil in prison, and we get to meet his roommate, where the guard states that his last roommate left in a bucket. The only thing that we see Cecil do to try and befriend him is just by saying,
"What's your name?"
a phrase that will be used later on when he confronts Omni-Man by the end of the episode. A few years down the road, Cecil has the prison under his control, originally going from 3 deaths a year to assumedly down to none. Cecil states that Radcliffe has no idea what he's had to do to turn the place into what it is now. But Radcliffe does know, and that's the point. While it is unfortunate that people had to pay the price in prison, it's a small price to pay for the lives that are saved compared to the ones taken. Radcliffe even says that he doesn't waste talent, he fixes it. Similar to what Cecil said last episode. In fact, his ideals are so closely interlinked with Radcliffe's that he even says the line that Radcliffe says to him as he is leaving the prison. Later on in the episode, after the incident with Invincible, Donald asks if putting Darkwing on the Guardians is a good idea. Cecil retorts to this by saying,
"People change, Donald. Bad guys reform, good guys forget what they're fighting for. It's just how it works."
We then get another flashback later on in the episode, this time showing us how much he's changed from his previous viewpoint on right and wrong. When he says in that scene that people change, he's referring to the line by Mark, and how much Mark has changed, but it's also a reflection on how much Cecil himself has changed, which is why we cut back to him when he's accepted the job. Cecil went from someone with a very idealist point of view like Mark, to then being like Radcliffe, who recruits criminals to help him, which may be some possible foreshadowing to how Mark's character will evolve throughout the series, but I can only guess from here. Unexpectedly, Cecil runs into a problem. He was so used to the prison that being back in the GDA building for the first time in a long while has made him uncomfortable. He isn't used to this new environment, but he does what he did in prison, which is quickly becoming acclimated to this new change of scenery. However, his employees think that he is someone they can mess with. Even if he's new, Cecil makes it clear that if they don't learn soon, then he'll be showing them who he really is. Funnily enough, just when he says that, a woman comes in with a report on a new superpowered humanoid randomly showing up. I think it's perfect because Cecil and Omni-Man don't fully know who the other person is, but they will be finding out quickly. Cecil gets a visual of who they're dealing with, and you can tell he's worried. He's hoping that this unknown beast has good intentions, but on the off chance he doesn't, maybe, just maybe, he can negotiate with them. Donald tries to argue that the protocol is to send in the Immortal, but Cecil instead makes what is probably the smartest decision he will ever make in his entire career. He refuses the help of the Immortal. By not sending in the Immortal, he saved the human race an extra 20 years. Throughout the course of Invincible, we have been shown that the Immortal is, and this is putting it lightly, pretty reckless and arrogant. He rarely listens to orders, is quick to anger, and has terrible negotiating skills. If it weren't for Cecil deciding not to send in the Immortal, humanity itself would be in flames. That single decision made by Cecil was the smartest one he's ever made. Although, on the slight chance that this turns out that this is Cecil's final moments, he says this on the way out of the GDA almost as a final fuck you to the people who have been doubting his capabilities.
And sir, what if he's hostile?
And Christmas comes early, and you all get that new director you wanted.
Cecil lands a chopper next to Omni-Man and immediately states who he is, trying to de-escalate the situation to show that he's not a threat. Then the final thing we see him say to Omni-Man is,
What's your name?
the same thing he said to the prisoner earlier in the episode. We later cut back to Cecil, getting told from what they were able to extract from the conversation, Omni-Man is lying. But Cecil already knew that. He's not naive. Despite the information he was told, he immediately wants to take advantage of the opportunity, and that as long as he wants to help, then they should let him help. But that doesn't mean he's going to be ignorant of Omni-Man's activities. He wants his team to start a file on Nolan to figure out why he's really here. He can't stop Omni-Man, sure.
But I can do the same thing I've been doing since I figured out you were a lying piece of shit. I can buy us a little more time.
We then cut back to present day where Donald keeps asking about Darkwing, to which Cecil tells him to leave it be. He then walks out, and before he leaves, he tells Donald something important that was told to him a long time ago.
We can be the good guys, or we can be the guys that save the world. We can't be both.
Cecil's arc has now come full circle. In this scene, he isn't describing Mark or anyone else, but he's describing himself. Cecil doesn't think he's a good guy. In fact, in the season 1 finale, he even admits that he hates himself. But at the end of the day, he is the guy who makes the choices that will save the world. This saying will be used later on in the finale of season 3 for Mark's arc as well, killing Conquest to save the world. We return back to Mark and his confrontation with Cecil, and he is progressively freaking out more by the second. He asks if Cecil ever uses these things for Darkwing or Sinclair, and Cecil simply responds by saying that neither of them have Mark's abilities. Mark claims that he only uses his abilities to help people, but Cecil replies by asking,
Who are you helping right now?
Cecil continues, saying that Mark sees things one way and won't make way for any other viewpoint. However, the same could be said for Cecil as well, and that's the point. Cecil is also talking about himself in this moment, whether he's doing it subconsciously or knowingly. Cecil continues, stating that Mark threatens people who disagree with him. Mark argues that he doesn't threaten, only for Cecil to respond with the fact that if that were true, then Mark wouldn't be scaring the shit out of him. Mark says that he's not even doing anything, but of course that's not the point. Mark, even when he's not doing a thing, can still be threatening. He's the most powerful hero on Earth, and his dad nearly killed everyone on it. It's unfair, yes, and I'm sure Mark even understands that to a degree, and probably isn't even thinking properly from everything going on. Mark, acting progressively more paranoid, jumps to the conclusion that Cecil isn't here to stand down, but to try and take Mark down, because he's afraid that he'll tell everyone what's going on in the GDA. So Mark, in a state of panic and anger, takes out all the reanimen in the room. one by one, with a single punch. This scene displays how much stronger Mark has become. Compare this to Season 1 when he was struggling with just one reaniman. The difference in power is apparent. Also, I just wanted to say that I like the possible Evangelion reference with the mist coming out of the reaniman's mouth. I'm not entirely sure if it is, but Invincible has made subtle references to popular media in the past, so I wouldn't be surprised. After taking all the reaniman down, Mark asks,
Is that all you got?
in the sense that it's almost insulting to Mark that Cecil thinks that a few reaniman could take him down, only for Cecil to reveal an entire room of them. Cecil once again asks Mark to stop what he's doing, for Mark once again to respond to Cecil by saying that he won't until he admits to everything. At this point, the conversation has gone around in circles, with not much progression from either Cecil or Mark, so Cecil tries once again to tell Mark to stop before he gets hurt, but Mark merely responds to this by saying that he's not the one who will be getting hurt. Cecil replies by saying that he thought Mark didn't make threats, only for Mark to respond in a very chilling manner, saying that people change. This line defines the character progression for Mark's arc this season. People do change, but what Mark is going to change into will set the course for his character for the remainder of the season and the rest of the series. Mark's character is going to change from someone who is thoroughly against the idea of killing someone, to killing someone when it is necessary, or when they threaten his friends or family. This no-kill rule was such a big deal to him that it was practically the only thing that separated him from being a Viltrumite, other than not wanting to become his father, of course. Mark continues to fight the reaniman when suddenly Cecil pulls out a device that overwhelms Mark with a frequency, leaving him in unbearable pain, which caused my guess to end up being correct about what Cecil was trying to do in my Season 2 video. For context, in Season 2 Episode 2, Cecil sends Mark on an array of random missions in hopes of probing for a weakness they could use against the Viltrumites. After Mark battles a giant sea monster in Atlantis, Cecil mentions that his file on Atlantean customs was severely outdated. This is made to look like Cecil made a mistake, but I don't think that's entirely the case. I think Cecil knew what was going to happen and wanted to see what Mark could handle. Mark is shocked to find this out, and attempts to rush to Guardian's HQ, which has Cecil worried. He doesn't want anything to get worse than it already has, because he knows that if Invincible reaches HQ, then the team will most likely rebel against him, and that Mark may be able to get the device out of his head in time. But it's too late. Mark comes crashing down the roof of the Guardian's building and asks Robot to remove the device in his head before Cecil arrives. But before Rudy can even do anything, Cecil shows up. Mark accuses Cecil of trying to kill him, and to Cecil, he may not think he's killing him, but to Mark, this is probably the most pain he's ever endured in a long time, or ever for that matter. So it makes sense that Mark would think that Cecil was trying to kill him, especially after his previous accusation towards Cecil of not wanting Mark to expose him to the media. Mark tries explaining this to the Guardians, and when Cecil tries shutting him up, the Guardians band against Cecil as they want to hear Mark's side of the story. Although Cecil isn't having any of it, and tells them to stand down. As the Guardians look on in horror, seeing how much pain Invincible is in, Rex is the first one to decide to jump in, which makes sense, considering his character is the reckless and headstrong one. However, there is another reason why he's so quick to revolt against Cecil that we will discuss later during Rex's section of the video. During the fight, Rex destroys the device that Cecil was holding onto, which only makes the situation worse because it's a dead man switch, and will only keep going if destroyed. Robot attempts to block the frequency, while the remaining reanimen all gang up on Invincible. Once Robot blocks the frequency, Invincible goes all out in a full rage, destroying every single reaniman in his path. If the Omni-Man parallels weren't apparent enough, then they most certainly are now, as Mark kills every reaniman in a similar way to Nolan killing the Guardians. And to make matters worse, both situations happened in the exact same spot. The Guardians all see this and stand there in complete shock, as if they are seeing Omni-Man himself in that room as he destroys the reaniman piece by piece. Cecil reacts to this by calling him an asshole, and that everywhere he goes, destruction follows. I'm sure this won't be foreshadowed for anything. He comments on how egotistical Mark is, which is true. Mark is pretty self-righteous throughout the show, and does at times feel like the rules don't apply to him. To add salt to the wound, Cecil brings up that Mark is a hypocrite for helping his dad, and later his brother, but won't let anyone else make similar mistakes. This is true, there is no denying that Mark is hypocritical and stubborn in this situation, But if we take a closer look at Cecil, he too is also stubborn and hypocritical, which only comes back to my point from earlier, where both sides are equally at fault. Cecil continues, saying that he should never threaten him again. What shocks me most is that after his entire Reaniman army had been decimated in front of his eyes, he still decided to slight Mark at that moment. Cecil turns to talk to the Guardians when Mark yanks him off the ground and chokes him against the wall, and Mark threatens to kill him if he ever talks to his family again. This is parallel to when Nolan choked Cecil when he was in his house. This moment is quite shocking, seeing Cecil, a man who had always exuded an air of control and authority, suddenly stripped of his composure speaks volumes to the audience. Cecil has always liked to be in control, and tries his hardest in practically every scene he's in to remain the one in control. However, in this scene, his illusion of control shatters, the genuine fear in his eyes and the helplessness he exhibits, as he is overpowered by Mark, making for a jarring contrast to his prior dominance. It shows us that he is not as untouchable as we had previously thought, that he's only a human being. This is proven even more so when Mark drops Cecil like he's nothing, and tells Rudy to get the device out of his head. Mark addressing Robot as Rudy in this situation is also kinda sweet, since it shows how much he respects him as a person. At the end of the day, Mark is a good person, he does care for others, and his heart is in the right place, but he's still just some kid. Yes, Cecil made mistakes too, but he was a lot older when he made them. Mark has not even had the opportunity to grow and mature all that much ever since the incident with his father. He's got a lot to learn, and if Cecil tried understanding that instead of giving him the stick treatment, like he received back then instead of the carrot, things could have turned out differently. Cecil can't force Mark the same way he was forced because he's a superpowered being, whereas Cecil is a regular person and had no choice but to stay in prison and cool off. Later, after Mark and Cecil's confrontation, the Guardians are forced to mop up the floor, almost paralleling the Season 1 finale where they don't deserve to clean it until they've earned it. The irony here is that this is the scene where the team gets disbanded, but that's not the only source of trauma in the scene. Ray is also uneasy at the sight of all the blood because of how much it reminds her of what happened last season. Rex tries comforting her, telling her that she doesn't have to clean up with the team and that she can sit this one out. But Ray's also concerned about what happened here, about how this sends a message to the whole team that they're only useful to Cecil until they aren't or they oppose him. Black Samson interrupts them by saying to crime a river, and while yes, Cecil messed up, Mark was the one in the wrong by tearing shit up. Of course, Black Samson doesn't know the full story, so this is a pretty biased perspective. Monster Girl argues that he wouldn't have had time to do that due to how much he had been overwhelmed by Cecil. Fraud Mortal cuts into the conversation when no one asked, and says that Mark for once faced consequences, and that Cecil had always been soft on him like his father. Obviously this is all wrong, but Fraud Mortal is clearly scared of Invincible. He says this in comparison to his father because he sees him as a threat, never a potential ally, and to be honest, I completely understand where the hate for Immortal comes from. He's a massive hypocrite who at the same time is supposed to lead by example, because he's the leader of the Guardians. He's always super close-minded and never tries to work with Invincible, instead he actively goes against him. He just has no qualities that make him a suitable leader, nor a good person. Monster Girl responds by saying that Mark's dad almost killed him, and that Nolan is not the same person as Mark, since Mark has given his life and nearly died on multiple occasions for the sake of humanity. Kate retorts by saying that all Mark had to do was follow orders, like everyone at the Guardians do. However, this is largely hypocritical of Kate, because she, like everyone else as Shapesmith points out, do not follow orders, which is ironic coming from Shapesmith, considering that he's not been with the Guardians that long, and can already point out Kate's hypocrisy. Rex, in a frustrated state, says that they never should have quit Teen Team for this, implying that they wouldn't have had to deal with Cecil and his nonsense, and the frustrations that come along with being in the Guardians. Which is fair, Rex has every right not to like Cecil, especially with everything that has gone on recently. Not to mention, he's also loyal to Invincible as he is his friend. Kate exclaims that they worked their asses off to get here, but that logic is inherently flawed. Just because a job may seem great at the time, that doesn't mean it's going to be everything you hoped for when you get there. She continues to say that she also died for it. This is technically true, however, Kate was never actually in any danger of dying. She keeps a secret copy of herself hidden far away, so if all her duplicates die, there's no legitimate threat of her demise. So her saying that not only lessens what Rex and Ray have gone through, but implies that she herself has been at risk of dying countless times, which, as we know, she has not. Kate then continues being petty and claims that Ray got killed almost immediately, which isn't exactly true. Everyone in that fight got taken out pretty horrifically early on. It's pretty ironic to say that Ray fell apart the minute she got hurt, when that's exactly what happened to Kate. To which Kate again says that she had just as close of a call as Ray did, which is factually incorrect. Amanda calls Kate out on being so self-centered, and that this isn't about her, it's about Cecil, to which Immortal claims that Cecil only does what's necessary, and that it was necessary for him to plant a bomb in Mark's head. Again, since Immortal doesn't know the full story, there's no reason he should be talking about this other than a bias for Invincible, after which he orders everyone to get back to work. I've mentioned before about Immortal being a terrible leader, but this only provides more context for why that's the case. The Guardians just saw Cecil almost kill one of their colleagues, which causes them to rightfully lose trust in the guy. And instead of Immortal trying to talk with them to help understand how situations like these can be complicated and messy, he makes the situation worse by telling them to deal with it or leave. To which Rex responds saying that he has had enough, and rightfully so. He's sick of the whole operation and wants to leave back to the Teen Team base, where he can work there. This turns into a massive argument which is then interrupted by Immortal, who de-escalates the situation like a leader would, and just yells at everyone and says that there's sacrifice and that they need to accept not being appreciated for what they do by being toy soldiers for their boss, and if they don't like that, then they should leave. Which Rex was already planning on doing to begin with, but not without telling Immortal how much of a hypocrite he is. As Rex, Ray, and Amanda prepare to leave, they give one final reason why they want out, saying that if Cecil put a bomb in Mark's head, who's to say that he hasn't done that to everyone here, which is completely justified. Cecil is that type of person who needs to be in control, and 2 steps ahead of everyone else. So the idea of him doing that isn't that far-fetched. Bulletproof proceeds to quit too, by stating that he can't work for a man he doesn't trust, which is a simple yet very reasonable explanation for why he won't work for the Guardians. Rudy is more on the fence. He only leaves because of his loyalty to Amanda, which ironically shows how much more human Rudy has become, which was his arc in Season 2, where he learned to be more like a person and not a machine. Shapesmith refuses to go with Rex in the group, mainly out of loyalty for Cecil, not because he respects him or anything, but mainly because he got to live after what he did on the Mars incident. And who could forget the race car bed? Samson's reason is the most rational and reasonable out of them all. He agrees that what Cecil did was messed up, but also states that he can't fix the system from the outside, it has to be done from within. Not only does Samson stay reasonable and level-headed throughout the entire ordeal, but also tries to reason with Immortal by asking if that last insult to the group was how he wanted to leave things, to which he responds by saying that they'll be back, which is partly true, except for Rex, but Black Samson thinks otherwise. We cut to the Grayson household, where Debbie is infuriated after learning what Cecil did to Mark. She was promised by Cecil that he would protect Mark, and while she never trusted Cecil, she never imagined that he would pull the stunt that he did today. At this point, Mark feels more betrayed than anything. He really did trust and like Cecil. Sure, Mark could be a bit gung-ho about what he was doing, where sometimes he wouldn't follow Cecil's orders, but he did like the guy. Now there is a trust broken between them that can never be repaired. Debbie says that he's gone too far, that if he does this, then who knows what he'd be capable of doing next. However, the same can be said for Mark, who tells Debbie that he told Cecil if he goes near his family again, he'd kill him. Debbie's response to this isn't by acting angrily or being shocked. She just sighs and is saddened by it all. She's saddened by the fact that Mark was pushed to this extent, that he had to say those words that were such a big deal to Mark in Season 2. Oliver comes out of nowhere and asks why he doesn't just kill Cecil. Of course, this shocks Mark and Debbie. Mark wasn't going to kill Cecil, it was just a threat. But Oliver doesn't exactly understand the concept of mercy. He thinks problems can be solved by eliminating them. But as we'll see later, the show will demonstrate why human beings can't just be snuffed out with little to no regard for them. Oliver then changes the subject, and is eager to help Mark now that he doesn't have the GDA anymore to back him up. Oliver claims that Debbie would allow him to do this as well, but Debbie stops him. She states that training and helping are entirely separate. She just wants Oliver to be safe and get the chance to be a normal kid first. This sets up another part of her arc that we shall discuss later. Mark agrees with Debbie and says in a serious but somber tone that Oliver should not be in a rush to get out there. What was once a young, happy-go-lucky teen, Mark has now been beaten down by the weight of the world. Superheroing is not what it's like in the movies or comics. It's serious. Things happen in the heat of the moment, and people can get hurt. Mark learns that within the second episode, when he tries saving someone and they die in the process. It's a whole different world out there compared to what is shown on screen, and Oliver is not prepared for that world yet. After the conversation with Oliver, Mark and Eve sit on the roof of the house, a motif that will be consistently used throughout the season as Mark slowly goes off the deep end. Eve is in disbelief at what Cecil did, and considering Eve's past, this means a lot to her. But with some reflecting, Mark understood why Cecil did what he did, but that doesn't mean he's still not angry with him. Eve argues that Mark doesn't hurt people if he can help it, and Mark responds the only way he knows how to.
That's me, Mr. Self-Control.
Mark is always going to be hard on himself for losing control or messing up. Mark is only human after all, and for a person at his age, the limits he has been pushed to is enough stress for 100 lifetimes. You can tell he hasn't quite gotten over Angstrom. He thinks about it every day, and even says that Cecil was right about the Angstrom situation. He didn't mean to kill him, but he did. Throughout the season, we will see his limits get tested, and how he will get pushed to the brink multiple times where he will lose control, irrevocably changing Mark for the rest of the show. What will never change about Mark, though, is his personal conviction to protect Earth. He will never leave it unprotected from threats, if he can help it. He may be losing that human side of himself, but that protector part of him will never fade. Eve comforts him, and Mark decides to say what he's been wanting to say to Eve before they got interrupted by Cecil. He appreciates that Eve is here after everything that has gone down. A common theme throughout the season is that Eve is practically the only thing that is keeping Mark from losing it further. Eve, in a way, is his shining light, the person who keeps him grounded, similar to how Debbie was that person to Mark in seasons 1 and 2. Eve states that she's mainly here in case Debbie needs any help with Oliver after the Cecil situation, but she knows it's more than that, so she pauses and says that she was worried for him too. Mark tries to communicate that what they were talking about before Doc Seismic came out all wrong, and that he didn't mean for it to sound that way. But Eve comments how it wasn't just that which bothered her. It was the fact that that was what Eve would become in the next 20 years. Of course she knows it's not actually her, but it's still embarrassing for her nevertheless. That Eve never moved on from him and was stuck in the past. And our current version of Eve doesn't want to be that way. She wants to make something of her life. She wants to save people and make the world better, not be stuck on Mark. Not to mention that she doesn't know whether the feelings that Mark has are that of a typical high school crush, or if he really wants to be with her. It scares her that she doesn't know, and she doesn't want to be in another Rex situation where they are constantly on again, off again. She needs someone she can depend on just as much as Mark needs the same thing too. However, the feelings that Mark has for Eve are real. He just doesn't know how to prove it to her. Unsure of the situation, Eve decides that the best course of action to take is that they need to take a break from the discussion and come back to it later when Mark and Eve are fully ready for that conversation. She leaves, but not without telling Mark that she will always have his back no matter what, and that might just have to be enough for the moment. The following day, Mark decides to tell William and Rick about what happened, not only because Mark feels guilty about what happened with Rick, but he also feels that they deserve the right to know. Mark once again keeps beating himself up, thinking that maybe the right thing to do in that situation was to kill Sinclair in that moment so he can never hurt another person again. But William tells him that he would have had no idea that arresting Sinclair would help him as a result, and states that he knows that Mark killing another person isn't who he is. Rick even says that if he were to kill Sinclair, he would be just as bad, and the world doesn't need more people like that. They need more people like Invincible. But Mark isn't so sure, and that is what scares him. Eve and Mark meet each other on the same bridge that they were on in the Season 2 finale. Except instead of Eve waiting on Mark back in Season 2, it's Mark waiting on Eve in this scene. I spoke about how in the Season 2 finale, what Mark needed was friendship and support. But now that he's moved past a lot of the things he was dealing with at the time, he thinks that now is the best time and that he's properly ready for it. However, I also think he has internalized Rick's advice from the last episode and wants to ask Eve out before it's too late. which is proven to be the case when he tells her how scared he was that he might have never been able to see Eve again when he was getting beaten by Cecil's reaniman. He no longer needs Eve to be a friend who has his back. Not anymore. The feelings Mark has for Eve are genuine, and after telling Eve how he felt while he was attacked by the reaniman, she is now confident that this is the proof she needed to see in order to be sure. She's now sure that she wants this, but before saying yes, she double checks with Mark to make sure that he wants this. And obviously, he does. They are now giving it a try. They want to make it work. Eve gets closer to Mark and asks him,
"So are we dating or what?"
Which is a neat little callback to the comics where she says this exact line to him under a different context. They then kiss, ending the episode on a high note, in parallel to the other bridge scene, which ended things on a more bittersweet one. Episode 3 starts off by continuing the ethical discussion from last episode, where for the first 6 minutes, we are shown the perspective of two bad guys, Tether Tyrant and Isotope, robbing a bank. They're only here for one thing, money, which is why they don't actually want to harm anyone. They just want money to live their lives. They're soon stopped by Bulletproof, but they manage to escape. This is when they come to the realization that this may be a sign that they should try to reform and better themselves. They buy a flower as a sign of it being a fresh start, a whole new beginning for them to explore. As the montage progresses, the flower slowly withers away more and more, until its petals are all gone, showing that the fresh new life they had planned has withered away, and that the dream is dead. The chance they had of reforming is gone. Throughout the montage, you can see that they try to sustain that life as best they can for themselves. They get a job, pay their rent, do their taxes, behaving like any normal civilian would. But then life happens, their rent gets higher, the job gets more stressful and demanding. They are tempted to go back to their old ways, but they keep persisting until they are out on the street. With no hope left, they decide that the only way they can sustain a living is by going back into a life of crime. There's an argument to be made with these robberies that if no one gets hurt, and the banks are insured, then it's a victimless crime. However, what the show points out is that, sure, the banks are insured, and while no one got physically injured, that doesn't mean there won't be any trauma from the customers who are witnessing the robbery, the damage done to property, and the potential fallout with cops or superheroes that could get people hurt in the process. As we see in this episode, we see children who are clearly traumatized by the incident, resulting in Tether Tyrant possibly having sympathy for the child and feeling bad for what they're doing. A few moments later, Invincible shows up. However, it isn't from his perspective, it's from the villains, where Invincible looks so much more menacing and intimidating. A godlike human who could snap your neck into 15 different pieces by doing so much as just flicking their finger would terrify anyone. Adding more context to how Cecil must have felt in that situation when he was trying to calm Mark down. Tether Tyrant and Isotope fight Mark because he's a superhero. They're not afraid to hurt a superhero because it's their job. But then Oliver comes in to help, wearing practically the same suit as Mark did on his first outing as a superhero. And when Tether Tyrant is about to fight him, he sees that he's just a kid.
No, dude.
We're not done yet.
It's just a kid.
So he lets him go, only for Invincible to punch his lights out. This montage does a few things. It foreshadows and provides context to the argument that Mark and Oliver are going to have later about the value of human life, and why heroes shouldn't kill. But it also gives Cecil's argument some more credibility and structure to it, showing that villains shouldn't just be locked in a cell for the rest of their lives, but should actively try to be reformed to either be regular members of society, or to use their talents to help people. And for some, they can't reform because of the systematic structure of the society they live in. It's such an interesting concept that is being explored in the show, and we get shown that not all of the people that Oliver or Invincible think of killing are actually inherently bad people, or want to do the things they are doing. They're just trying to survive. Debbie is disappointed that Oliver is using his powers without having been trained, or watched properly by Mark. Mark comes to Oliver's defense though, and says that he's a tough kid, and a lot stronger than Debbie gives him credit for. But Debbie wants him to be a normal kid first, because as we briefly discussed while dissecting episode 2, the superhero lifestyle is not for kids. It's traumatic and violent. If Oliver can't live a normal life, he'll grow up with some issues. Mark promises Debbie that he won't let him get hurt, and won't let him hurt anyone on his watch. Words that Mark will have to eat later on in the episode with the Mueller confrontation. The conversation ends with Debbie telling Mark that he doesn't have to do this and that he didn't ask for this. But neither did Debbie. They're a family and will always have each other's backs, something that Mark values, not only because he loves his family, but also because he doesn't want to betray his family like his father did. If Oliver's gonna try and be a part of the superhero lifestyle, then Mark decides that he should train him. So they first work on their flying, and later they go to Arts to give Oliver his very own suit. All of this parallels Omni-Man training Mark in Season 1. This mirroring continues when Mark, like his father, escorts Oliver to Arts. While Oliver is trying on his new suit, Mark makes sure to go over the deal with Oliver that he's not allowed to use his powers in public without permission. Oliver agrees, but since he's a kid, he will later rebel against those rules, especially in Episode 5 when he uses them when he's with his friends. Afterwards, Oliver introduces himself as Kid Omni-Man. Mark and Art obviously take issue with this, because while Oliver loves his dad, the rest of the world doesn't, and has not forgiven him for the atrocities that he's committed. What I find interesting as a continuation of the Mark v Cecil debate is the conversation he has with Oliver about his dad. Cecil is right about Mark being a hypocrite. He acknowledges his dad has done an array of terrible things, but he also acknowledges that while he can be forgiven, it will be a while before he is, showing Mark's hypocrisy that he is willing for his dad to be redeemed, but not other people like Darkwing or Sinclair. On the other side of things, Oliver isn't aware of how much his dad screwed up on Earth. He only remembers the side of him from Thraxa. So Oliver wearing that suit, while with good intentions, does not mean that people will forgive Omni-Man. Although it's apparent that Oliver is still just a kid. While he is smarter than most kids academically, he still sees the world in a very black and white perspective, similar to Mark, which will soon change for him. Before we move on, there are a couple more addendums I'd like to address regarding Oliver's suit. One of them is the Kid Omni-Man / Omni-Kid thing, is that it's completely ironic. Oliver grows up faster because of his Thraxan DNA, so soon enough he'll be calling himself Omni-Man like his father. Speaking of his father, the suit Oliver wears is a mix of black, red, and yellow, a combination of Omni-Man's color scheme, along with Mark's original suit, which is quite fitting, seeing how Oliver's morals this season are a constant mishmash between the two. Art then brings up that Mark cut ties with Cecil, with Mark saying that it's time for a change, which is a callback to the last episode when he says that people change, in response to Cecil about him threatening people, a change that we are going to see on full display with Mark's new suit. It's now a blue and black color scheme instead of his iconic light blue, yellow, and black that makes him look more heroic. So the color scheme for his new suit makes sense, as blue is the opposite of yellow if we go by color theory, unless we go by the traditional color wheel, which is where you get orange. However, I've also seen people say that Mark's blue suit color scheme is the opposite of Omni-Man's color scheme, which would also make sense, as Mark's arc isn't learning to be better, it's a reverse arc. He's turning more into his father, while his father turns more into Mark. It's more darker from a thematic standpoint because of his stance on killing and his morals changing. Robert Kirkman has also confirmed that Invincible's blue suit is meant to mirror Spider-Man's symbiote suit in a way, and I definitely see it with how these are probably the lowest points for both Spider-Man and Invincible. Well, so far. They even address that the suit is meant to be taken as a darker tone for the character by Mark saying,
I don't know. Feels a little serious?
with a lightning sound effect in the background to reflect it. This is all broken up by reports of a break-in at the penitentiary, only for Oliver to excitedly zip away to the fight, despite him not knowing where to go, which reflects Mark back in Season 1, where they'd actively point out Mark's lack of geography skills that are still present if we're being honest. As they get there, Mark sees that training Oliver is going to be difficult. He's reckless like Mark was, and doesn't know how the game is played, so immediately gets himself hurt. Mark loses it for a minute and goes berserk on Kursk and Furnace, which I don't think is by mistake on the writer's part. I think it's very intentional that they want to show Mark being brutal with his enemies in his first fight while wearing the blue suit. After the fight, he gets mad at Oliver because he's new to training, but also is extremely worried for him. As Mark is dealing with one problem, another arises where Debbie has told Paul Mark and Oliver's identity without his permission, which is a valid concern and definitely should have asked. However, the problems don't stop there, as they keep stacking up on top of each other. Ever since Mark got his new suit, The general public thinks that instead of Invincible getting a new suit, they assume that a new superhero has taken the liberties of Invincible's outfit, calling him Invincible. Mark meets up with Eve, and they both talk about the good and bad going on in their lives, as a healthy couple should. Eve talks to Mark about how well her conversation went with her parents about her situation as Adam Eve, and mentions to him that she ran into Amber, since he doesn't know whether the effects of Mark being a superhero have permanently impacted her in negative ways, especially after the Anissa incident. But as it turns out, she's doing a lot better, which is a relief to Mark. He then proceeds to rant to Eve about the multiple problems he's currently going through, and notices that he's going through a similar problem he went through in Season 2, which is gaining more responsibility again. With his family and personal life, he doesn't know how to juggle it all. He's looking at it in a way where he is responsible for them, but that doesn't have to be the case. He can't have the superhero mindset for everything. He's going to have to learn to depend on others and that he isn't alone. Mark keeps on trying to do things himself that don't work, but when he has people around him to support him, he actually is invincible. Without Eve's support, he wouldn't be where he is, and without Eve helping him fight Conquest, he would be dead. Mark has to learn that throughout the season, and he does, which helps him become a better superhero. The scene then comes to an ominous end when we find out that someone is watching Mark. Returning back to Rex and the gang, as they have moved back to their old location funded by Robot, they try to get settled in, as Rex goes back to his old room and immediately gets reminded of how he used to be. Something that I like is that they don't change everything about Rex's personality. He's still crass and sometimes doesn't think before he says things, but it's clear it's no longer for selfish reasons, and it's just him being him, or accidentally coming across as rude. He and Ray get to know each other better via trauma bonding. Ray talks about when she developed her powers, she lost all the normalcy that came with her life. However, with Rex, he never got to have a life. He was sold by his parents to the government to do tests on him, which explains why he has a problem with authority, especially Cecil, who works for the government. What I find interesting about Season 3 though, is that they don't outright tell you Rex's backstory, like the comics do. Instead, it's explored through bits of dialogue we get throughout Season 2 and 3. In Season 2, Eve delivers home decor magazines to him because he's never had a home before, and the only way he can get to experience that environment is by reading those magazines and trying to live that life of having a home. We also get some dialogue in Season 2 where Rex mentions living at Eve's place because he had nowhere else to stay. In Season 3, we get told that his parents sold him to the government, where they grafted shit to his bones. While they leave some things up for interpretation in Season 3, I might as well just explain the comic backstory so you get all the context required, as I unfortunately don't think they'll be giving us a Rexplode special anytime soon. For clarification, the spoilers I'll be reading out will not entail any upcoming plotlines in Invincible. If that was something you were worried about, then you don't need to anymore. So without further wait, let's talk about Rex's backstory. Rex was born into an impoverished family who sold him to the government director of the GDA, Radcliffe. He underwent intensive training and surgeries to make him a super weapon for the government. He often carried out government missions for Radcliffe, but throughout his whole life, he was never told about what happened to his parents. When one day he managed to track them down, he finds out that not only are his parents alive, but that he had been replaced. This explains a lot about his behavior. He probably acts like this because he thinks no one will care for him, and will continue not to care when he's gone, like with his parents. So who cares if he's nice? As long as he does his duty, then it's fine. However, this whole mindset of his changes when he actually does almost die and realize how much he's fucked up, and tries fixing himself throughout some of Season 2 and the majority of Season 3. The unfortunate part is that when he feels like he has finally found himself and is comfortable with who he is, he dies. When talking to Ray, he even holds the belief that everyone has fucked up childhoods, which means he likely thinks that what he went through as a kid was somewhat normal or is average for other kids. When moving, we also get shown that Rudy is working on something. This mysterious box he's so protective of will become relevant later in episode 6. In the meantime, Eve arrives to check up on everyone, and reveals that she will be moving back in with her parents, to mend the relationship she has with her parents, but also mainly so she can be closer to Mark. Rex makes fun of her a bit, to which Eve responds by saying that she thought Rex had changed for the better, only for Rex to respond in a very sassy and cute way. Unfortunately, it's pretty depressing on rewatch, given the added context that this will be the final time Eve ever gets to see Rex. We transition over to the Mauler twins, breaking into the same place the Lizard League broke into last season. And instead of last time being a bloodbath for the Guardians, it's going to be a bloodbath for the Maulers. The Guardians try and fight the Maulers, but it's clear the recent loss of members, and the new ones, have impacted the Guardians and their teamwork skills, as they get beaten fairly easily. Invincible is alerted to the news report, and while he acknowledges that he doesn't work for Cecil, he will still help them anyway. He says it pretty hesitantly because of how much he despises Cecil, and he's still mad with Debbie for not asking about his identity first, before revealing it to Paul, so he zips off without saying goodbye to her. Meanwhile, the Maulers have kept the Guardians as hostages, and to make sure that they know they've lost. This plan is acknowledged by the other Mauler, and says that his sentimentality will get them killed someday. Maybe not someday, but sometime fairly soon. Something I picked up on is that the Maulers aren't acting like their usual selves. They have stopped bickering with the other about who is the original, because they now know that neither of them are. Thus arguing with each other about it now would be fruitless, which is a neat detail that was carried over from Season 2. Invincible tries stopping them, but fails, as he is struck with a weapon that took out the Guardians earlier. Just as he is about to get killed, Mark is saved by Oliver. The Maulers decide that for insurance, they will send the nuke into the atmosphere, so they only have to deal with one of the heroes. However, that doesn't quite go their way, as Oliver brutally kills the Maulers in cold blood, while simultaneously Mark takes a missile to the face. Both of these are parallels to display just how strong and durable these characters are. Oliver killing the Maulers is meant to mirror Invincible in Season 1, to Oliver in his early years. They both do about the same thing. Kill Ken and tries to surrender to Invincible in Episode 5, but Invincible still punches him out regardless, but not killing him. Whereas with Oliver, the Mauler twins surrender to him, but he kills them anyway. A key difference in how Oliver and Mark do things. But you could also see it as a reverse arc, where at the end of the season, Oliver sees why killing people is bad, whereas Mark sees why it needs to happen. Oliver kills the Maulers because he has a childish notation of how the world operates. Similar to Mark, he thinks if you do evil, then you're an evil person, when that sometimes is not the case. It's even shown in the beginning of the episode that it is more complicated than that. Yes, some people like the Maulers don't have friends or family, but there is still a chance of reform for them that Oliver snuffed out. However, knowing what Oliver has been through, it makes sense why he wants to kill. He remembers what happened to Debbie in the Season 2 finale, when her arm got snapped in half by Angstrom. It makes sense that he'd be brutal towards bad guys, and why he wants to jump in to save Mark all the time. Despite Mark's hatred for his dad going off and sleeping with another woman, he still cared for his brother, and almost gave his life to protect him. So it's obvious that Oliver wants to do the same. The only issue with that is since Oliver is growing up too quickly, and hasn't had the chance to interact with humanity all that much. He hasn't had the opportunity to develop empathy or proper reasoning. He can't control his emotions, the same way that most adults can. It's childish, and that's the point. Even when Fraud Mortal sees this, he doesn't call him a murderer, but a child. Because of his childish understanding of morality, he doesn't understand why superheroes hold back and don't kill people all the time. But it's because of this scenario specifically. When Cecil shows up and sees what happens, Oliver tries to defend himself and states that it was an accident. Once again, displaying how childish he truly is, by trying to sloppily cover up what he's done with a white lie in hopes that they'll believe him, and he won't be seen as the villain. Cecil tries comforting Oliver, saying that they're stunned because they're not used to seeing a child do this sort of thing. Oliver is a Viltrumite, and obviously, people are terrified of the power they possess. Omni-Man was capable of destroying the world, and seeing Oliver, a kid who is not in control of his emotions and could fly off the handle at any time, and do this type of thing, it's reasonable why they're so scared of him. But before Cecil can say anything further, Mark chokes out Cecil. Mark tells Cecil that he told him to stay away from his family, and Cecil tells him what happened to not only save his skin, but to make him feel guilty, as a way to make him feel like he's in control. Cecil once again does this to try and take control of the situation by comparing Mark to his dad. Mark sees what happened, and it's almost like he saw a ghost, a smaller version of Omni-Man forming. He makes Oliver take to the sky, and leaves, proving Cecil right, that Mark doesn't accept anyone fucking up, unless it's his own family. He's self-righteous, trying to take people to prison for stealing or almost killing someone, but when his own brother kills someone, he doesn't pay the price. Mark gets frustrated with Oliver for obvious reasons. He killed Angstrom and beats himself up over it every day, so seeing his brother so nonchalant about the whole thing would have an effect on anyone in that situation. Oliver gets quite upset with Mark for being so frustrated with him and flies away. Mark catches up with Oliver and attempts to be more understanding this time, but it quickly gets turned into a debate of why killing is wrong. But we already discussed that earlier, and going into that more now would be repetitive at this point. The reason I brought this scene up with Oliver to begin with is the final few lines of dialogue in the conversation Mark has with Oliver, where Oliver says this.
You sound just like Dad.
So? Why is that bad? You act like you know everything, but do you ever think that maybe Dad was right?
But we never see a response from Mark, just silence. However, we as the audience know the truth. We know that Mark does, in some ways, think Nolan was right. Hell, he was debating in the previous episode that maybe some people do deserve to die. While he definitely doesn't sympathize with what Nolan did, he does hold some form of belief, even if it's for a split second. In the comics, it's a bit more overt, where Mark glumly states, sometimes. However, I like the change here, as it is way more impactful. We know that Mark agrees, but he just can't admit it. As a result of Oliver's actions, Mark is late with meeting Eve. However, unlike in his relationship with Amber, Eve is more understanding, because she is in the same line of work as Invincible. She knows what comes with the cost of doing the job. Mark explains what happened to Eve with Oliver, and Mark is stumped on what to do. He doesn't know how to deal with any of it, and he's still mad with his mother for what she's done. However, Eve acts as the voice of reason here, and rationally explains to Mark that, yes, things got messed up, but Oliver is just a kid who is still learning, and Debbie just lost her husband and is trying to live a normal life again. After Eve explains this, Mark says,
Where would I be without you?
Something he says often throughout the season, and it's true, he would not be the same without Eve, which kind of foreshadows the conquest fight where Eve dies and he loses it. He turns into an animalistic counterpart of himself. However, these words hold a more deeper meaning than that. To Eve, words of affection mean everything to her, because of how little her father ever says anything complimentary to her. And with Mark, spending time with the person he loves means everything to him, because his father was never often there for Mark, and was usually off saving the world. Another subtle way of showing how they are truly the perfect couple for each other. In a sense, Eve kind of replaces Debbie with their pep talks to ground Mark. But that doesn't mean that Debbie isn't important as a character anymore. She is still there for Mark, and tries to help him whenever she can. In fact, the very next scene is of Mark and Debbie doing the dishes together. Debbie is doing it because it's something that helps her feel grounded, and she is desperate for normalcy after everything that has happened to her these past couple of seasons. And Mark is willing to indulge this, not just to spend some quality time with his mother, but also as a way to ground himself too, and to take Eve's advice from earlier that it's okay to depend on others for a change. Mark apologizes that he got mad about Paul, and Debbie explains that she needs someone she can talk to instead of bearing it all down, and that she's not able to talk about it with Mark or Art without them getting depressed about it. Comparing it to Mark's relationship with Eve, and understanding how important it is to have people to depend upon. But Debbie also apologizes. Yes, she needs someone to talk to, but she should have went to Mark about it first. The episode practically comes to an end, with both of the characters admitting to their faults, which is a huge thing. They made mistakes, but they forgive and move on. They all realize this situation is uncharted territory for them. This is the first time Debbie has dated someone normal in decades, so she doesn't know how to go about it. With Mark, this is the first time he's had to mentor someone, and it's a big learning process for him. He's going to have to kind of be like his dad in that area, and that's not something he's comfortable with. It's new because he was on the receiving end of the mentorship for once, and never did he think that he'd have to be the one to do it for someone else. After their conversation, they both decide to confront Oliver about the Mueller incident. However, Debbie isn't harsh with him about it. She's stern, but soft at the same time with Oliver. She explains the value of life in a way a child could understand, and for the most part, he does. While it doesn't turn him away from the idea of killing, it helps him understand the concept a lot more. It's quite a heartwarming scene, where the family all gets together to confess their mistakes and admit they're not perfect. Well, it would be heartwarming if it weren't for.
Gotcha.
showing that while everything could seem perfect and normal for a second in all their lives, something will always come by to disturb it, reinforcing that arc Debbie will go through this season. The episode then ends by revealing that it was Angstrom Levy all along who was spying on them as he plots his revenge. The next episode opens with Rex and Ray shopping for some food. Now that they're not a part of the Guardians anymore, they'll have to cook for themselves. Rex reverts back to his old ways, stating how boring it is, and how that they should just get a drink instead, but still sticks with Ray anyway. They both talk about their lifestyles before they were in the Guardians. Ray talks about how she was on a strict diet before she could eat solid food, and that Rex never really got to watch his weight because he thought he was too good for that stuff. It's interesting how these two characters are mirrored but ultimately have different arcs. Ray has been doing superheroing her whole life and wants something more than just doing it until she dies. She never wanted that life to begin with, it was forced on her, whereas Rex has been groomed for his entire life, ever since he was a kid too, and since the superhero lifestyle is all he knows, he feels that if he leaves it, then he doesn't know who he'd be, that he'd be a nobody. The reason why Ray does shopping is because she does it to feel normal. She wants to try and be a civilian for once in her life, instead of the hero. Rex notices how seriously she takes this, so he tries to be helpful. That is until they're interrupted by the supervillain Gridlock. When Rex sees this, he can't wait to go into battle. Rex is always the type of person who jumps into the fire to rescue someone, anyone, even when he knows he's going to get burned. Ray, on the other hand, is hesitant. That normal civilian life she dreams of having is now interrupted, and she goes into battle annoyed that she has to deal with this, now of all times. She can't just normally live her life without being brutally interrupted to be a hero. It's selfish, sure, but she never got a choice in this life of who she wanted to be, which arguably would make it her responsibility to decide whether that is the life she wants. The following day after Mark finds the orb spying on him outside of his house, Robot analyzes what remains of the device that Invincible found. As he analyzes it, we get shown a cool detail about his character that he can multitask. In fact, he's more efficient when multitasking instead of focusing on one thing at a time. But Amanda asks him to stop since it's creepy. Still continuing that arc where Amanda tries to help Rudy act less awkward and become more human. While it's not the most fleshed out arc of the season, the payoffs we get to their characters feel so genuine and beautiful. Rex and Ray then come back from their fight with Gridlock, and Ray is clearly annoyed from the fight, when it's revealed to us that they didn't get the chance to go grocery shopping, and instead are ordering pizza tonight like Rex used to do. This is not what Ray wants. She wants to cook for herself and be normal for once, to which Rex then asks the group if they're all too weird, showing that Ray's clear disdain for superheroing has now had an effect on him, and is going to make him think about whether he wants the normal life like her. When Robot finishes his analysis, he mentions how he wasn't able to find out who made it, but clarifies that it was definitely made by someone with a lot of resources, and is of Earth origin. This can only mean one thing to Mark, that Cecil is behind this. Instead of confronting Cecil in a genuine conversation, he breaks into the Pentagon and starts smashing up the place to get his attention. This is when Mark stops using his head and starts to lose control again, like we saw from last episode. A Viltrumite throwing a tantrum is probably one of the scariest things to happen to a person from the outside perspective in this show. Mark doesn't consider the implications of his actions, he just breaks into the Pentagon, guns blazing, and accuses Cecil of spying on him. However, something that Mark didn't consider is that I don't think Cecil would want to piss off Mark that badly. When the orb was caught, it created a massive explosion that would piss off Viltrumite, which we know is what Cecil doesn't want to do. Mark accuses Cecil of spying on him, but Cecil states that it's not theirs, and that if they wanted to spy on Mark, they'd never know it. Which is true. Nolan was spied on by Cecil for years, and never even knew it till the end of season 1. Something I really appreciate is just because Mark has the device out of his head, that doesn't mean Cecil won't take any countermeasures to stop Mark, and as a precaution, places those devices around the Pentagon, in case of a situation exactly like this occurring. It's pretty smart of Cecil, and shows just how much he trusts Mark less over time. Mark proceeds to get what is presumably a text from Eve, and checks it out while in the middle of the conversation, and decides to leave, which is extremely selfish of Mark. He goes wherever he pleases, and just because he's running late, he leaves whenever he wants to, after causing millions of dollars in taxpayer money. This is the beginning of showing the audience just how selfish Mark is becoming. Even Cecil tells him in a sarcastic manner to not let them keep him. It's clear by the cadence from Cecil's voice that it's a lot more ominous. He's more serious and stern with Mark than before when he was actively trying to reason with him. Here, he doesn't care. He is rightfully angry at Mark for acting like a child and throwing a tantrum. He is listening to himself before he listens to anyone else, just like his father, which Cecil points out in Season 2, Episode 3, where Mark is just about to leave for Thraxa. Mark floats up above Cecil, literally showing that he has the high ground over him in this situation and is more powerful. Mark then utters the words,
This is not over.
which sounds like a threat, with the intention of implying that Mark may be back later just to scare Cecil. In this scene, both characters leave a message for each other. Mark is basically saying to Cecil that he can come here anytime he wants and break in at any point he chooses, where Cecil is saying that they'll be ready for him if he chooses to do so. While the message on Cecil's part is mostly a bluff just to act bigger and scarier, it is also partly true. However, I do believe that Mark does want Cecil's help here after figuring out that it's not him. He leaves Cecil to destroy a drone, pretty much saying that he wants his help even if he can't say it. Although, it could mean that Mark just doesn't give a shit. He's willing to leave a mess wherever he goes and not bother with cleaning up after himself, and leaves the drone there as a reminder of what he could do to Cecil if he finds out it's him. When Mark leaves, Cecil is terrified, but also curious about the device Mark left at the same time. Donald points out a statement Cecil made earlier and mentions that they are in fact spying on the Grayson family, but Cecil states that it's not with this device, which means it had to have come from someone else. Mark is now running late for his date because of his outburst with Cecil. He checks the time, and we get to see Mark's wallpaper of Seance Dog, his favorite superhero, showing that while he is slowly being corrupted, there is almost a twinge of youthful innocence still in there, which is nice to see. He manages to arrive to the date with Eve in Paris, and they talk about how they thought it would be weird dating, but it actually feels right. Unlike with Amber, where at times they would point out that it felt like they were on a really bad first date. However, before they can continue with the date, the pair get interrupted by Dropkick and Fightmaster again. Mark gets annoyed and threatens to put them both in prison after what they've done, once again choosing the most extreme method instead of trying to hear them out. They try to explain to Invincible that this is life or death, and that there's not much time to explain. Mark declines for a number of reasons. This is his first date with Eve, and he really doesn't want to screw it up like he did with Amber. Secondly, Mark wants to stay here on Earth, because people could need him at any moment, especially with the arrival of the Viltrumites coming soon. Thirdly, Mark is still struggling to find out who he is. He's struggling with his identity of whether he wants to kill or not, and what is ultimately morally righteous. When they see that Mark is acting stubborn, they try to guilt-trip Mark into coming, but it doesn't work. Although you can subtly hear he's a bit unsure of himself and stuck up at the same time. This mirrors a few scenes. The first is that this entire dilemma mirrors the one that Mark had in Season 2, Episode 3, when the Thraxa bug tried getting Mark to go off-world to help, and refused to go at first. But because of William, he did. Except here, Mark is even more selfish because of the change he's undergone this past season. Even Eve is shocked by this, to the point where she even checks in with Mark, to be certain if he's sure about this. And if Dropkick and Fightmaster didn't suddenly force him to come with them, I'm sure Eve would have convinced him to go with them, just like William did. Besides, it's as William says, the last time Mark chose not to help someone, it didn't go very well. So despite the stubbornness on Mark's side, I'm almost certain he would have gone anyway. This scene also mirrors Debbie and Nolan's date scene, where Nolan refuses to help and lets Cecil earn his paycheck, in order to keep spending time with his wife, which Mark does exactly the same here. Mark then gets shoved into the portal, angering him, but the twins try calming him down by saying that if Mark helps them, they'll give him back the Declaration of Independence. Mark begrudgingly goes along with this. He's understandably angry because he just got taken away from his date with Eve without his consent, and Earth could be in danger while he's gone. Mark gets changed, and it's revealed that Mark wears his costume all the time underneath his clothes, which shows just how committed Mark has become to being invincible in this season. It has effectively become the only thing he does with his time. Last season kind of made it a point that Mark had to separate his work life from his personal life, to the point where he had Cecil make the Guardians take care of any problems he had on his days off, where he would leave his suit and earpiece at home. However here, Mark can no longer afford to separate that life. He's invincible all the time. He always has to be on call, always has to be there if something happens.
Wow, you just have that on all the time? Hey, you're already on thin ice, buddy.
Mark proceeds to ask where he can effectively stash his clothes, only for a more miserable looking version of himself from the future to come out and grab his clothes for him. Mark is confused and concerned about what just occurred, but little does he know that this future him is from a few minutes later. The twins tell him not to think too much about it because of time travel implications. Though chances are they probably knew the reason Mark was so miserable by the end is that it probably had something to do with the Immortal's assassination to make him feel that way. The twins proceed to explain what happened to their future. Essentially, centuries ago, a man was made ruler of Earth. He slowly went mad over time, becoming a fascist dictator who is basically unkillable. Invincible hears about this and immediately thinks that they are describing him and that he's turning out worse than his father. Or it could be someone else who is a Viltrumite that may have killed Invincible in this timeline. Either way, this is extremely concerning to Invincible, and asks the twins if this person who is ruling is a Viltrumite. They claim not to know who that is, but Invincible decides to help anyway, because if this is a Viltrumite, he needs to take them out. After the Chicago incident, the fight with Anissa, his mental breakdown with Levy, Mark cannot walk away from this. He blames himself for all the deaths as if they were by his own hand, so it makes sense that he'd want to help out in any way he can. The twins come up with a plan to get to the king by making some noise to attract the attention of the king's guard. When they show up, Mark asks if they are sentient before he fights them, because Mark still has a no-kill rule, despite it slowly waning throughout the season. They say no, but before the twins can say anything more about their plan, Invincible recklessly attacks the robots. Afterward, they explain that they actually want to be captured by the king, to which Invincible asks for the king's name, worried that this mad king may be himself, but they don't reply. Matters only get worse when the robots scan him and state that they've been waiting for his arrival, meaning that the king has been expecting his presence for a while now, which doesn't help with the fact that this may be Mark who is king. The twins tell this story about their past, how their mother died and they got sent to internment camps, to which Invincible says nothing. If he is behind this, then the guilt he's feeling right now is too much to say anything. He's simply in shock. When they arrive at the king's door, the twins get sent off to the execution room, much to Invincible's dislike. So he almost does something extremely reckless again, only for the twins to point out that they actually want this to happen, and they only need him to take down the king. As Mark enters the throne room, expecting to see his future self, all he sees is the husk of his old friend, the Immortal. Immortal proceeds to tell him some extremely vague future events, how Mark left with his family, and that he looks frail, thin, and weak. He asks if Mark was sick again, and that they thought they found a cure for what Mark was ill with, which is some interesting foreshadowing for this early on in the show. Before Immortal can say anything more though, Mark cuts him off by saying that this isn't about him, and he asks why Immortal is hurting people. Immortal's reasoning is that it turns out that future Mark was the one who left him to rule, and that he's not like the Viltrumites. He is not fit to be a leader, and that he was not ready for it. Mark asks why he doesn't just quit, but Immortal responds by saying that a king doesn't quit, and that he couldn't kill himself as that would be the coward's way out. But in actuality, it's more cowardly to kill millions, potentially billions of innocent people, in order to get Invincible's attention, to try and get him to kill him, rather than just ending his own life. He's too afraid to do it, so he hides behind all these made-up rules that he himself most likely doesn't follow. In this timeline, Immortal has also had so many lovers that he cannot possibly remember them all, Kate included. This is continued from his arc in Season 2, where he has known so many people, and all of them are dead, causing him to become more reckless and angry, so it tracks that this future Immortal would be like that, but 100 times worse. Immortal keeps trying to push Mark into killing him, but he can't. Immortal keeps persisting, saying that if he does, he will not only stop more deaths, but the ownership of Earth will be passed on to the common people, and not him. He continues interrogating Invincible about how many more must die because of Mark's mistakes, something that the show has covered before. Mark has messed up time and time again, and has made mistakes. Not because he's a bad person, but because he's human, and that's what we do. But Mark continuously blames himself for this, which is most likely slowly tempting him more and more into killing Immortal. Seeing how fighting and trying to get Immortal to end his own life isn't working, he tries getting the Immortal to talk with him to try and figure something out. But again, Immortal denies him, and Mark is slowly running out of options to stop Immortal. The option of killing Immortal is becoming a more likely solution to Mark, which is what Immortal wants. Immortal then tries killing civilians to motivate Invincible, but he stops him, to which Immortal says,
"What kind of man lets others die because he won't act?"
This is something that clearly gets to Mark, and is something Nolan tried instilling into Mark in Season 2 on Thraxa, when the Viltrumites were attacking. Mark doesn't need to think, he needs to act. These two scenes are both foreshadowing to the finale of the show, where Mark doesn't think anymore, he only acts, because if he doesn't, everyone around him will die. But also, I think that this gets to Mark, because in his mind, he should have done something to try and save the people he could never have saved. If only he'd done something different, if only he acted, further overwhelming Mark, causing him to impulsively kill the Immortal. The twins are disturbed by this, but they thank Mark for killing the Immortal regardless, but Mark asks them not to thank him for a few reasons that we'll talk about. The first is that Mark himself is partly responsible for this occurring, as he was the one who left Immortal in charge of the planet, so he feels guilty for all the billions of lives Immortal slayed. Secondly, Mark was forced to kill Immortal when that was never Mark's intention to begin with. He just killed him out of anger and frustration when he was trying to find a different alternative. And third, this situation is a reflection of Mark's fears. Mark is worried that if he made a decision this terrible in the future, that this might mean he might screw up as bad as future him in the present, causing him to doubt his ability to protect Earth. Not only that, but by killing the Immortal, he has effectively become a hypocrite for what he's been preaching to Oliver all season. Not only did he kill the Immortal, but he has once again become his father. This leaves Mark with an overwhelming sense of guilt and discomfort with who he's becoming. Mark continues saying that killing Immortal because he wanted it is not enough reason to kill someone, but the twins argue that he killed millions of people, to which Invincible responds, saying that he saved millions too, effectively using the same logic Oliver used for Omni-Man when saying he was a good person, once again pointing out Mark's hypocrisy for not only refusing to give the same leeway to Sinclair and Darkwing, but because he's also using the same flawed logic that Oliver used later in episode 6. When Mark is about to leave, the King's Guard comes to declare that the King's reign is over, and that the order has been transferred to the people, showing that even near the end, Immortal still had some piece of goodness in him that made him transfer his power over to the people when he died, making Mark feel more guilty for what he did. The twins once again say that he did do something bad, but he saved their world, which is something that Invincible will have to come to terms with when Conquest and Levy come back. The scene comes to an end, where Mark takes his clothes from past Mark to bring back to the present. They come back to the exact point they left off, and immediately tells Eve everything. Eve reassures him that despite that being the future, that wasn't their future. Despite the fact that future Mark made that choice to keep the Immortal around to rule the planet, that doesn't mean that Mark has to make the same mistake. But to Mark, that doesn't change the fact that he killed him, and while Eve doesn't really have a solution for that at this moment, she does reassure him by saying that they will get through it together, solidifying that Mark really does need Eve in moments like these, to help ground him and make him feel human again. Without her, he would not be the same. Eve proceeds to reassure him that if he ever becomes a world-conquering dick, she'd kick his ass back in line. This is foreshadowing to the Invincible War, where she fails to do exactly that, but she still does it out of love for Mark, which is what counts. However, Eve only says it if he promises to do the exact same for her, to which Mark responds to that stating she would never do something like that. But he cuts himself off to see Eve's look. Mark knows Eve won't become a conqueror, in the same way that Eve knows that Mark won't either, because they both know each other that well, and trust each other to the same degree. They kiss, and Eve suggests that they should get out of here, with Mark thinking that he's ruined another date. Once again, Mark is assuming blame for things that aren't his fault, because he genuinely dislikes himself, but Eve teases him saying that she didn't say that, and only said that they should get out of this place in particular. Mark agrees, but not until they've dropped the Declaration of Independence back at New York, with Eve correcting him, saying that it's Washington, D.C., which is when the scene transitions into one of the best moments in the season, the proper Mark and Eve date, with Joji's Your Man playing in the background. Unsurprisingly, there's quite a bit to dissect about the scene, so let's analyze it. When speaking about the song itself, Your Man is a song that details themes of longing, emotional vulnerability, and devotion, In Invincible, the song's lyrics and tone reflect both the excitement and uncertainties of their relationship, and the contrast between the present and a future that's uncertain. One of the core themes in the song is devotion and the desire to prove oneself to a significant other, whether that be Mark or Eve. The lyrics constantly emphasize the commitment to be there for the other person, which mirrors Mark's mindset during his date with Eve. The relationship has already been a bit strained due to Mark's double life as Invincible and the trauma he carries from his previous battles with his father, Angstrom, Cecil, and others. Yet this date represents his attempt to reconnect with her and offer a fresh start of sorts. The lyrics of the song suggest the need for trust and a reaffirmation of love, which aligns with Mark's desire to be emotionally available for Eve, despite the challenges that come with being a superhero. It's also Eve proving that she'll be there for Mark, that she's her man. However, the song also communicates emotional burden. Mark carries an inordinate amount of trauma throughout the show, especially after experiencing the disturbing nature of the future timeline, where the Earth was ruled by a mortal and then killing him. When he goes on this date, he is not just trying to enjoy a romantic evening, he's trying to desperately escape from the emotional weight of what he has done. Additionally, the dreamlike quality of the song mirrors the fleeting nature of their date. For one night, Mark and Eve allow themselves to be teenagers in love, temporarily free from the weight of their responsibilities. However, the audience knows that their moment of peace cannot last forever, but just for this one moment, for this one singular night, they can enjoy a simple night out together. For once, it feels like the two are acting like teenagers, and the whole thing makes their connection feel more genuine and earned.
This is dumb and way too soon, but I love you.
Is exactly what a teenager would say in this situation. This is only their first date, and already they know there's more than just a spark here. There's genuine chemistry and connection. While Mark may be moving too fast, I think that there's a genuine worry that he wants to get the most out of the relationship before other burdens and responsibilities rear their ugly head. But I think it's because he genuinely thinks that Eve is the one for him. He's confident in it. And from Eve's response, she seems to be as well. I also like the color contrast between Mark and Eve. Eve is so much more colorful and full of life, whereas Mark's outfit is black and is a clear sign of his arc so far that things are getting darker for him, and his outlook and morality will only increasingly get darker. As the date comes to a close, the pair end up in Mark's bedroom, where they share vessels.
Tell me we shared vessels.
What's that?
We finally come back to Alan and Nolan. Unfortunately, in terms of Omni-Man content, there isn't much to cover, so keep that in mind as we navigate through this segment of the video. Alan is biding his time trying to convince Nolan to escape before he's executed, to fight back against the Viltrumites, but Nolan refuses at every turn to Alan's appeals. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's betrayed everyone. He's betrayed the people on Earth and the Viltrumites. He has nowhere else to go, and feels like he is someone who should not be saved. But he is also scared to admit his feelings for other people, especially Alan, so he rarely, if ever, says anything as he sits and awaits for his death. He feels guilty for everything he's done, and does not think he should be redeemed. As the Viltrumite soldiers take him away to his execution, Alan attempts the breakout he's been planning to save Nolan. While Nolan is being beaten, they ask if he has anything to say in his defense, but he only says for them to continue the execution. This is for two reasons. Nolan doesn't say anything in his defense because they wouldn't possibly understand what Nolan feels for his family, and he is so ridden with guilt that he cannot possibly defend himself as he thinks he has betrayed Earth and Viltrum. They then continue to ask if the betrayal was worth his death, and this is obvious to Nolan. He would do anything for Mark, Debbie, and Oliver, even if that meant treason against his own kind. Nolan isn't overrun with a sickness, he's overrun with love, and Nolan says back to them,
Yes. And I'm sad you'll never understand.
With what seem to be Nolan's final words, he goes out practically insulting the Viltrumites. He pities them for never experiencing what he did. Love, life, humanity, nature, everything. He pities the Empire for the fact that they will never experience that kind of virtue that was bestowed upon Nolan. He went out almost satisfied that he lived the life he did with his family. While it did end in heartbreak, I think Nolan does hope that the information he gave to Mark about his books and Oliver are enough to redeem himself in a way that helps Mark stop the Empire, and for Oliver to continue being what Nolan never could, a person, not a traitor to the human race. When Alan finally arrives at Nolan's execution chamber, he is still unwilling to go. Nolan is very stubborn like this. However, there is a way that allows him to undergo change, and that is during the utmost extreme circumstances. In Season 1, Nolan had his entire worldview changed, not only by his time on Earth, but because he was still somewhat loyal to the Empire. He had to finish his mission, but when push came to shove, he couldn't kill his son. He was hoping for the easy way out, for Mark to join him, but he never budged. So under extreme duress, he changed his mind and flew away. In Season 2, he still has conflicting feelings about the Viltrumites, and when seeing the dead Thraxans, he becomes disoriented and confused. He's not supposed to feel this way, but his son Mark convinces him again under extreme duress. Now in Season 3, Alan, a person that Nolan has fought for years, and has recently become buddies with, is about to die. I think you can predict what is going to happen next, but during this extreme stress, Nolan can't stop himself from saving Alan. As much as the Viltrumite and stubborn part of his body is saying no, he can't help it. That human side of him wins, and in a satisfying turn, Alan and Nolan work together, and are now more powerful than ever. Once their battle with the Viltrumite soldiers is over, Alan quickly suggests that they try to hijack a vehicle and go on with their escape. But Nolan reveals something extremely important, a revelation that actually makes a whole lot of sense when it comes back to the lack of Viltrumites coming to Earth. That information is that there are less than 50 pure-blooded Viltrumites in the entire universe. While we don't currently know the reason as to why that's the case, for the comic readers who do know, we'll be analyzing that in the next season. With a lack of Titan in Season 2, Season 3 decides to follow up on Titan's storyline after he and Invincible defeat Machine Head, and Titan's life is getting better. The city he lives in is a lot cleaner and safe, and his daughter is no longer sick and is getting her medicine on time. Which brings up the question for the episode, should we take down someone for making the city a cleaner and safer place just because they're a criminal? This kind of moral dilemma works well for the current version of Mark, as he is more cautious and untrusting, whereas in Season 1 he was a bit more naive. Not to say that he still isn't in this season, in fact, I would argue that he's even more so than he was in Season 1, but that's a topic for later. While all is going well for Titan, he runs into a significant issue, Mr. Liu. Mr. Liu is someone that Machine Head worked for, and was dead terrified of, showing that while Titan barely managed to get out of Machine Head's thumb, that doesn't mean he's exactly scot-free. Even when he kills Mr. Liu, with Invincible indirectly helping him, he still gets revived by the end of the episode, showing that while Titan is doing well for himself, crime never does pay. Now that we've established a decent baseline for what we'll be getting into this episode, we cut back to Mark and Eve the morning after their big night out together. Debbie wakes them up from downstairs, and the pair try to plan to make Eve's entrance for breakfast inconspicuous and not suspicious. While she's trying to leave, she steps over what she describes as small things around Mark's room. This is clearly all of Mark's action figures, to which we see Mark get rid of in Season 2, as a little mini arc for Mark to attempt to be more grown up. But it's very clear that Mark is still just a kid at heart who loves Seance Dog and comic books, so it's a neat detail to see that he's bought more action figures since then. Eve knocks on the door as Mark comes downstairs, and both Mark and Eve do an extremely poor job at lying, to the point where even Oliver snitches on them by asking why Eve left through the window if she was just going to come back anyway. Again, showing that Oliver is just a kid who just so happens to be academically intelligent and who has no clue about social norms or conventions. Debbie smiles at this. She appreciates the normalcy of the situation that she's been desperately craving for since Season 2. We also get our attention called to the fact that Oliver is having to burn through more food than the average person, not only because his metabolism is better as a kid, and he's growing fast, but also because he is part Viltrumite, and most likely burns through a lot of calories per day. I would also like to point out that Oliver acts like a world-class snitch and manages to get more pancakes compared to Mark, which is an injustice in the world that needs to be corrected if you ask me. Okay, I feel better now. Debbie, clearly enjoying herself, decides to tease Mark a bit by asking how he slept. She obviously knows the answer, but for once in a long time, she is finally enjoying herself and is happy. Oliver interrupts saying that Mark made too much noise playing, and that he couldn't sleep, to which Mark kicks Oliver's leg, and Oliver kicks it back again. It's a very cute scene showing the sibling dynamic between Mark and Oliver, It's adorable and demonstrates they are both able to function as a proper family. Eve, on the other hand, finds the situation too awkward to bear, so she tries changing the subject to hope that maybe Debbie will forget about what has been happening for the past few minutes. Mark himself then proceeds to change the subject, saying that he wants to move out. There's a lot of reasons why he wants to. Not only will he and Eve be able to get more privacy to do the things they want to do, but after the Angstrom situation, Mark thinks it would be the best course of action to be away from Debbie and Oliver to keep them safe, so they won't be in any danger when villains try to attack Mark. These are all very good reasons as to why a person, especially in the superhero world, would want to move out. Independence and safety is key, and it's not even like Mark would be too far away. He'd at least be a 5-second flight away, so he could get to them in case they're in any trouble. However, Debbie and Oliver also have some good reasons as to why Mark should stay. The first is that Debbie would be too overwhelmed raising Oliver on her own. The thought of Mark leaving makes her feel even more isolated and alone. The second is Debbie's fear of losing that sense of normalcy and family stability that she has been longing to have ever since Season 2. After the Omni-Man incident, Debbie has had to practically rebuild her life all over again, pick herself up from her bootstraps, and be more independent. With Mark being at home, she has some sense of normalcy and support. Mark leaving makes that stable household less of a reality, with Mark stepping into more of a parental role for Oliver. Mark realizes this when he notices how Oliver behaves by sneaking out at night and engaging in risky behavior later on in the episode. Debbie knows that without Mark's presence, it will be much harder for her to guide Oliver and ensure that he grows up with the right moral values. These things make Mark realize near the end of the episode that he can't move in with Eve, and that he has bigger responsibilities with Oliver and Debbie. Not to mention that his brother is still growing up and needs a figure of support that's not just his mother. Later, Mark and Eve discuss further about the opportunity of moving in together. They want to take it seriously, but for that to happen, they need a reliable revenue stream in order to pay rent. They proceed to discuss why Eve just can't create a penthouse suite for them to live in, because of the fact that they recently introduced zoning laws for them that forbid this. And the reason why she doesn't generate money for them using her powers is because of the arc she went through last season, where she took her powers for granted, trying to take the easy way, and bad things happened. She learned that to be a hero, a good one at that, she needs to learn how to control her powers and do things the right way. So they try and think of finding a job for Mark. Mark doesn't think he can do part-time work, but Eve has an idea. A job that puts Invincible on retainer for him to get paid for whenever the person or company is in trouble. As Mark and Eve continue to set up their business, Mark states that he doesn't know how to set up his own email, which is pretty consistent with Mark being a bit stupid about general knowledge. In Season 1, it was him not knowing about space being cold enough to freeze food, and also not knowing where Everest or Mount Rushmore is. In Season 3, it's him not knowing how important the Declaration of Independence is, or how to set up an email.
Am I gonna be a dentist? A lawyer? A coder?
Yeah, sorry my boy. Your ass is not becoming no coder. Mark then proceeds to get a knock on his door from Debbie, and Mark cutely tries to hide Eve like that's going to do anything. However, Debbie comes to him with bad news. Oliver is missing. Since Debbie isn't a superhero and can't fly, she doesn't know where to start looking for Oliver. Things start looking hopeless, hence another reason why she can't raise Oliver without the help of Mark. With a normal child, maybe, but with Oliver it's just impossible. She needs Mark. We then shift over to Ray watching some reality TV to try and grasp what a normal life could possibly look like outside of all the superheroing. And I like how the show Ray's watching mirrors her thoughts about Rex, stating that,
"Honestly, Brad wasn't on my radar, but after that last date, he's totally grown on me."
Ray then gets a sudden knock at the door from Rex. She opens the door and sees a letter on the ground with Ray's name spelt wrong, and a drawing inside that looks like the two of them sharing dinner together. This tells us quite a bit about Rex's character. Because of how he was sold into a government facility at a young age, it makes perfect sense he doesn't know how to write, which is why the only thing he can do is look at the pictures in his home decor magazine. She comes down to see that Rex is cooking for her and making a normal home-cooked meal, showing his growth from the previous episode. He wants to make Ray happy and foster a deeper connection with her, not just sit around eating pizza using Robot's credit card like the old Rex used to. While all of this occurs, Bombay Beach Revival's song plays in the background titled What I Needed. I've previously spoken about how music in Invincible has been used to describe deeper meanings within the characters, and if you want a great example of this, watch my Season 2 video, where I talk about the Karma Police scene. The song What I Needed is about the peace and happiness that comes from finding the right person, mirroring Rex and Ray's relationship. Lines like, "All along, you are the only thing I needed," and "Now we're just sitting here, you and me," reflect this perfectly. Rex and Ray are inherently broken people that have had their childhoods taken away, but through their connection together, it makes that cruel, cold world they share together a little bit warmer, which is what the lyrics of the song are screaming out throughout the entire interaction. They need each other, and they can't do this alone. As the song continues to play, we see Rex cooking a steak for Ray. Rex states in an earlier episode that when he was younger, his parents sold him for the price of a steak dinner, and in episode 5, when he is cooking for Ray, he is cooking her a steak dinner, the first meal he is learning to make. He's repurposing his trauma from his parents selling him out, and uses it as a way to further his connection to Ray. He also mentions that the food is from a meal kit, and that it turns out he can properly follow instructions. This is a reference to episode 2, when Immortal shit-talks him for not properly following orders. Speaking of which, when leaving Guardians HQ, Rex grabs some of Immortal's stuff, and one of them was some old bottles of wine. However, it seems that it is expired because the wine is terrible, and they spit it out as they describe how revolting it is. After they eat a bit, Ray asks Rex if he is still aware that none of this is normal. Rex sadly agrees with her, but she cheers him up by saying that it is still good, cutely saying that while he did his best to try and make things normal and it didn't work out, she still loves spending time with him nonetheless. Something that I didn't notice until rewatching the season is that this scene demonstrates how mature Rex has become. He didn't even swear once with Ray on the date. Mark and Eve go out searching for Oliver. Mark is already freaking out, and considers calling Robot, or Cecil God forbid, proving that while he never wants to admit it, sometimes he does actually need Cecil's help, and possibly regrets leaving the things the way they were in their previous encounters, but is too stubborn to admit it. They eventually find Oliver hanging out with kids his age. He's having fun, skateboarding, the whole shebang. He's trying to be a normal kid, all while learning to control his powers. He hurts himself on the skateboard a few times, and Mark gets really worried for him, but Eve holds him back. Mark and Eve are just happy to see that he's living a normal life outside of the superhero business. While he was breaking curfew, it wasn't for any malicious purpose, he just wants to have fun. However, things get more tense when some older kids want to use the park, and tell Oliver and his friends to get lost. What's cool is the main kid telling them this is the exact same one Titan spares in Season 1 when he wants to give them a message. Mark gets really worried, but Eve tells him not to worry about it, and that Oliver can handle himself. But as Mark says, it's not him that he's worried about, it's what may happen to the bully. But Oliver does a pretty good job at controlling himself, and knows that this person, despite being an asshole, does deserve to live, which is amazing character growth for Oliver these past few episodes, and really makes it seem like Debbie's talk positively impacted him. When they escort Oliver back home, Debbie expresses her concerns that she can't track Oliver like Mark can, and while he is living a normal life being a kid, he has begun to become more rebellious, and that is something difficult to take care of when he has superpowers. Mark says they will take care of it, and while he is still dead set on moving in with Eve, he does say that if she needs them, he is only a call away. Mark then gets a call from the prison he is on retainer to, and sees that it is Titan. Mark is still a bit salty from Titan almost getting him killed, and when he's just about to punch him, he turns into his human form, because Mark is still against killing at this point, but his morals and ethics on the matter are slowly weaning. He decides to follow Titan and hear him out, where Titan basically recaps to Invincible about what we already know. If Titan doesn't break Multiple out of prison, the neighborhood will go back to the way things were before. Invincible does care about the neighborhood and people, but he still clearly doesn't trust Titan from his previous endeavor with them, not to mention that indirectly helping the Order could have massive consequences for Mark as a whole. But as we discussed early in the video, this refusal to help Titan is a bad thing. His emotions are clouding his judgment from seeing the purpose of helping out the little guy, all because he got betrayed by someone. So, of course, he decides not to help, and that he's going to take Titan in, but to Mark's dismay, Titan manages to escape. We cut back to Mark at his own place with Eve, silently reading her architecture book, and Mark is still welling over the fact that he chose not to help. Yes, Titan is better than Machine Head or Mr. Liu, but they're all still bad, and the show states that just because he's doing something good, that doesn't make any of the things he's doing less bad. It's a thing that you need to look at from both sides. Titan is a criminal, and is still running a criminal operation, but his reasons for why he's making a change is only for that town specifically, whilst not trying to help other impoverished people in different areas too. He's not a bad person, he's just trying to benefit himself, and the reactions for it are also understandable. The question that the episode asks the audience is that if this is an unfortunate necessity, or if Titan should be taken out regardless. Later on, Mark finds out that Titan wasn't in fact lying, and that Mr. Liu is over there attacking the prison. Mark clearly feels bad about this, since his intention was to never get more people hurt, but in the end, Mark made a judgment call. He had seen what happened before when he worked with Titan, and decided not to get involved. Mark thinks of going out there on his own, but Eve reminds him that they are in a relationship, and that they are here to support each other, not only for moral support, but for protecting each other and helping one another, no matter the situation. It also reinforces the point of Mark having to learn the idea of having to rely on other people, and that he can't do things alone. After the massive dragon fight with Mark and Eve, Titan saves him by getting Machine Head to kill Mr. Liu. In return, Mark wants to take them to prison, but is too gravely injured. Mark is left feeling terrible about the situation. It feels like he got played by Titan, and got terribly injured in doing so once again. He helped Titan get rid of his biggest rival, and instead of Mr. Liu being in charge of the order, it is now Machine Head, which isn't much better, basically contributing to the saying, if you cut off a Hydra's head, 3 more appear. Although a neat detail that I found out about is that in the background, you can see War Woman's girlfriend as a part of the order, showing that her stance on morality and ethics likely changed when Omni-Man killed War Woman, and probably blames Invincible too, which is a pretty nice hint for the next episode's subject matter. Eve tries to get Mark to cheer up by saying that they got paid after she helped rebuild the prison, subtly showing the audience how much her architecture classes have been paying off. And while Mark did get played, it was better than doing nothing about the situation where people could have gotten killed, though Mark is still sad he didn't accomplish anything. After all that effort he put in, he is back to square one. Mark talks to Eve once again about their living situation, and decides that while it is something he wants, he doesn't know if now is the right time with his mother having to take care of Oliver. Eve understands this. In fact, she's been feeling like things have been going a bit too fast anyway, so it all works out in the end. Not because she doesn't share the same feelings Mark does for her, but with everything going on recently, everything changing, it's understandably too much for Eve. Mark goes back to talk with his mother, and once again, everything comes full circle in a quite roundabout way, where Debbie understands that she can't be so protective of Oliver all the time. She has to let him spread his wings, which is something that Debbie has come to accept more towards the end of the show, especially with the destruction of the Invincible War happening. Oliver accepts that he shouldn't sneak out, and Mark makes the sacrifice of not moving in with Eve to stay with Debbie a bit longer to help look after Oliver. Debbie is evidently relieved about Mark staying, but is also concerned that she is the main reason for Mark staying, which is partly true. However, Mark also wants to spend more time having a little brother. Mark has been an only child his whole life, and spending time with his brother, someone he can finally connect to in the family, is a nice change of pace for him. The scene even ends in a very cute way, where Debbie lets Mark know that he doesn't have to keep lying to her about having sex with Eve, and Mark just uses his super speed to clean everything up and leaves. Although, one thing I will bring up that is my only real issue with the episode is that they didn't add in that one panel from the comics where Kursk escapes and Mark shouts at him to get back inside. It would have worked really well because he fought Kursk back in Season 1 and earlier on in Season 3, but it also works just to show how intimidating Invincible is now in a very darkly comedic fashion. It's not a huge deal though, I still adore this episode, as it serves as a breather from the intensive non-stop action we've been getting, and is only a tiny complaint that I think would have benefited the narrative overall.
Invincible! Where is your remorse? Have you no shame for what you've done? The lives you've taken? You think you're above consequences, but you are wrong! You will pay for your crimes against humanity! I, Powerplex, will make you pay!
The episode starts off by occurring before the Chicago incident as it's about to happen, and I'm glad they're doing it now. The Chicago incident was a big thing for Mark, and in Season 2, something that I felt like was missing was seeing the civilian perspective on it. Seeing the entire battle happen from the viewpoint of not Invincible, but a random civilian we don't know anything about, makes the situation all the more terrifying and brutal, especially as a foundational starting point for what will occur throughout the episode. We are introduced to the character of Scott, watching his niece play, and comments on how carefree she looks, with his sister Jessica mentioning how it's the childhood they never got. It's a blink and you'll miss it line, but that line signifies that maybe Scott didn't have the best past growing up, and maybe wasn't all that mentally well off to start with. We've previously talked about traumatic childhoods in this video in the form of Rex and Ray, and how Rex repurposes his trauma into something better, but here we are going to see how trauma and loss can absolutely destroy someone. We also establish even before he becomes Powerplex that he does have powers, showing that when force is applied to him, he becomes more durable. As the camera cuts away from them, we get to see the bustling city of Chicago, and it honestly feels sad to see it so full of life, since we know exactly what is going to play out next. As Scott gets his coffee, immediately beams of light and explosions tear up the city, skyscrapers fall apart, windows are shattered, and we only see glimpses of Invincible getting knocked through the air. While it isn't clear from Scott's perspective what he's trying to do, we as the audience know that he tried to save Jessica and Gretchen. In fact, Gretchen and Jessica were the only people he attempted to save before Omni-Man got there. The final scene we see of Chicago is Scott sitting in the wreckage, seeing his wife and child dead. We cut to some time later after the Chicago incident, and Scott has been trying to build a case against Invincible that he too shouldn't be above the law, with a number of people agreeing to this as well. This isn't just some small thing. His forum has over 3,000 signatures that were gathered for Invincible to stand trial. For all Scott knows, Invincible could have been working with his father, and that fighting him may have all been an act. The fact that there is no trial, no case, no investigation, no nothing, frustrates Scott. However, I think what really makes the situation unfair in Scott's case is when District Attorney Barnett says that their laws don't apply to situations like these, which definitely makes you feel angry towards that, since that is bullshit. The fact that a superhero can't even stand trial for something like that because the laws beneath them is terrible. Scott is trying to do this the right way, in the way of the law, and the system failed him by basically saying that laws are beneath heroes. So it makes sense why Scott would try to take matters into his own hands. But as you'll see later on, that vengeance he wants, it consumes him, and only makes him more reckless and irresponsible. An undisclosed amount of time passes, as we cut to Scott at the GDA. It turns out he works there, helping them with what seems to be research on Viltrumites, and creating weaponry to take them down. When suddenly, Donald comes in a hurry. Scott is very clearly worried about the situation, and we find out later that it's because he stole some equipment from the GDA itself. This is addressed in the next scene as an inventory miscount, which would make sense. The pace they are working these people at to create shit to fight back against Viltrumites is overworking them to the point where stuff is bound to get lost or damaged. Scott talks about how bullshit it is that the GDA are blaming them for lost equipment when Invincible is the one who leave thousands of people dead in his wake. One of the co-workers even points out how Invincible broke his way into the Pentagon from last episode, and that he doesn't even get a slap on the wrist. Which is true. Mark even treats it quite nonchalantly when he meets up with Eve. Anyone else in this situation would be locked away for the rest of their lives for committing treason. Of course, this is all build up to attempt to get the audience to side with or even sympathize with Scott after all he's been through. A situation like this is extremely complex, with many layers behind it. Yes, Mark did do all of these things, but he is a reckless teenager who has been through a lot, and despite him doing some bad things, he is still humanity's only hope. Speaking of Invincible, Mark is continuing to train Oliver by making him fight the elephant. Oliver does a pretty sloppy job at handling the situation though. It's as Mark says, he's got to look out for other people and try not to damage property. It's very interesting because this scene mirrors the scene from Season 1, Episode 1, when Mark is trying to take down his first villain and makes a mess doing it, with Omni-Man reprimanding him for it right after, which is once again a very strong parallel for Mark turning into his dad. Moreover, I like how this scene is later contextualized, where Powerplex doesn't look out for other people and gets his family killed. After training, Oliver asks a complicated question if his father can be forgiven. But the thing with Oliver is that he has a completely different perspective of his father. He never saw that side of Nolan trying to take over the world, how brutal he was, how much disdain he had for the human race, whereas Mark got to see both sides of his father, and the answer to that question is a lot more complicated than Mark thinks. In fact, it's what this episode tackles, the consequences that come from Omni-Man's actions, showing all the lives he has ruined. Omni-Man may have regretted those actions, but the consequences for them still linger. He destroyed the lives of thousands of innocent people, including Powerplexes. Powerplex is a living manifestation of the sins of the father that affects Invincible. Oliver's perspective is understandable. He had his homeworld destroyed by a bunch of Viltrumites, and his father, who had been nothing but loving his whole life, got taken away by them. And now he has to migrate to Earth, where that father who was kind to him turned out to be a mass-murdering genocidal maniac on this planet, which would be hard for anyone to comprehend. It's difficult seeing that perspective, since Oliver is literally a prince from another planet, and has been treated nicely by his father. It's as Mark says though, just because their father saved a lot of lives, it doesn't mean they cancel out the lives he took. While it does seem like Omni-Man had been reformed on Thraxa, Oliver asks which side of his father is the real one, his Viltrumite side, or the one that Oliver and Mark knew as kids. Mark obviously can't answer that question because he truly doesn't know. He can't know who his dad really is, or what his intentions are. But when it comes to forgiving Omni-Man, I don't think there is a way for the world to forgive him. But just because he can't be forgiven, that doesn't mean he can't try to be better. He can still do things for the greater good, like he was attempting to do last episode in trying to take down the Empire. That is what really matters. We cut back to Scott, trying out the equipment he stole from the GDA, and is practicing his speech for when he encounters Invincible. Scott has clearly lost it, and has let vengeance consume him. His whole motivation is accountability, but throughout the episode, it shows that the pursuit of that, if left unchecked, can leave you isolated and disturbed. When he puts on the equipment, he tries testing it out, and almost hits his wife Becky, foreshadowing for what is to come later on in the episode. As Powerplex feels the power coursing through him, he laughs maniacally at the fact he is able to take on Invincible toe-to-toe, but that laughing turns into crying as he realizes that despite being able to take Invincible on, he still doesn't have Jessica or Gretchen back, which is a sign that he can do whatever he wants to Invincible and try to make him suffer for his quest for vengeance, but that's still not going to bring them back. As Scott puts away his costume, he wakes up the baby. We'll talk about this part of the story later on, but it's very clear that despite these two wanting justice and deploying schemes that are dangerous, they should not rope their kid into it. What's just as bad though, is his wife enabling the whole thing, which implies that she is just as, or maybe more, mentally unstable than Scott. We cut to a scene where Paul, Eve, Mark, and Debbie are all having dinner, but Paul is feeling a little insecure. He can't measure up to Mark, Eve, or even Oliver. He's just a normal guy, and can't even relate to them, which is why he's so scared they're not gonna like him. But that's not the point. Mark understands the value of human life. He doesn't see it as beneath him, he sees it as something that should be treasured. It's as Debbie says, it's not about measuring up, it's about showing up and being there for them, which is something that Debbie had to do to feel somewhat normal, which is why she dated Paul in the first place. Later we transition to Powerplex on the roof, contemplating jumping off to give himself more power. It's very reminiscent of the leap of faith scene from Spider-Verse, but reversed in this context. He jumps not for himself, but because of what he thinks Gretchen and Jessica would want. Meanwhile, in the background, the song Take It All by Helena DeLand plays, reflecting Powerplex's mindset in that moment. While not much of the song is utilized in the scene itself, upon further inspection of the lyrics, I noticed how the entire song manages to line up perfectly with Powerplex and his deluded mindset. The first verse in the song goes as follows: I couldn't help it. No, I made it up. The life I danced in, and could get enough. This verse reflects Powerplex in a way where he has constructed an imagined version where Invincible is the person who killed Jessica and Gretchen, instead of dealing with those emotions in a healthy manner. That version where he has an outlet for someone to blame is more intoxicating and irresistible to Scott. It also reflects about how the person in the lyrics is unable to let go of someone who has a hold over their emotions. This can either apply to Invincible, Gretchen, or Jessica, but Invincible is the most likely candidate. The song then continues saying, I wondered who let you call them baby. you do have the way with the ladies. The first and second line represents the idea of Powerplex perceiving Invincible to care about people, that Invincible doesn't actually care, and only saves people, whether that be for attention or some other selfish reason. The third line signifies how Invincible has a way with people to make them believe he is a good person. The ladies that the lyrics mention are civilians Invincible saves in this scenario. The main chorus continues with Powerplex's ill-perceived mindset saying, "Take it all, bring it back to my bed, take it all, nothing needs to be said, take it all, I'll use the space it frees up in my head for thoughts of you to spread." This part is pretty self-explanatory. Scott has taken all negative thoughts about Invincible and has let it infect his head with hateful thoughts of him to spread. The second verse is more about the cycles of revenge and how destructive it can be, with the first line stating, "I couldn't help it, no I came back." This line is in referendum to how Powerplex is drawn back into the cycle of revenge and emotional turmoil, despite the destructive nature of his feelings. Him wanting to confront Invincible after the loss of his family mirrors the sense of being unable to resist, no matter the emotional cost. The song continues to say, "If it's a cruel game, well, I came to know if I'd met my match. I wasn't playing though." This line points out how Powerplex's perspective on Invincible shifts as he comes to see Invincible not only as the cause of his suffering, but also as someone who tests him in ways he hadn't anticipated, with the next line saying, "Holding you close, I froze in motion. Holding you close, I froze in motion," meaning that he's caught in his own emotional distress, unable to fully act on his feelings, yet overwhelmed by them, and that this line is referencing when he saw Gretchen and Jessica dead beneath the rubble. He froze in motion, literally holding them near and dear to his heart. The final line of the song then ends it with, "Now I can't wait to join the commotion." He's joining in ready to fight Invincible, and wants to create the same impact mentally that the Chicago incident did for Invincible. The song Take It All has such an intimate and melancholic take to it, where the singer is caught in an endless cycle of obsession and detachment. Lines about bringing back everything to bed and making space in one's head for thoughts of the other person to spread suggest an obsessive devotion to them. The repeated phrase, "take it all," can be seen not only as an invitation, but also a resignation, surrendering to the inevitability of loss and grief. It's such an emotionally charged song that flows through Powerplex as he takes his first leap of faith. We shift over back to Mark, celebrating William's birthday, which is when we get to see Mark interact with Amber for the first time in a while. Things are obviously a bit awkward between them. Amber sees that Mark is dating Eve, and makes sure to let Mark know that she isn't judging. So long as they are both happy, that's all that matters. Them meeting up again is good in a way. The way they left the relationship in Season 2 was depressing, and it's nice to see Mark relieved about not having to worry whether he traumatized or ruined the life of a person he cares about. Yes, Eve told him that she was doing well for herself, but I think that Mark properly getting to see that is good for him. Hell, he even gets along with her new boyfriend over their love for Seance Dog. However, not everything can remain perfect for long, as we get shown a breaking news report from downtown about Powerplex destroying the city. But Mark is not interested, not only because it's his night off, but for other reasons as well. The first is that Invincible got played by Titan last episode, which in turn is why he's not feeding into Powerplex's nonsense on the news. Secondly, Mark has grown more selfish throughout the season, prioritizing his needs over others at points. Thirdly, as Debbie says later on in the episode, the man is clearly disturbed, and confronting him will not result in a good outcome, ending with more people getting hurt. As we switch to Powerplex's perspective, he's raving like a lunatic in the streets, yelling about Invincible. This is the part where Powerplex becomes a lot less sympathetic in the eyes of the audience. In this scene, no one really listens to Powerplex, nor do they take him seriously. They see him, and for most of the civilians, this is a regular afternoon where some supervillain is disrupting their evening. Whereas the police are frightened about getting injured, this is a topic that has been subtly referenced throughout the show, like in Season 2, Episode 1, when the GDA and Invincible come in. One of the officers looks sad and disappointed, probably feeling inadequate about the situation, not being able to do anything to help. And here in this episode, the officers are hiding behind cover, hoping for dear life that another supervillain doesn't kill them today. It's a neat thing that has been referenced a tiny amount throughout the show, that cops are almost useless in this world, and I hope we get to see that element covered more in Season 4, or in one of the later seasons. While Powerplex thinks he is getting justice for Gretchen, Jessica, and all the victims in Chicago by doing this, he's only creating more victims in actuality. It's as I said earlier in the video, when Tether Tyrant and Magmaniac were robbing the bank. It's a victimless crime, in the regard that no one will probably get physically hurt, but the trauma and effects on everyone will stick with them for the rest of their lives. Shapesmith arrives to handle the situation, but because of how unaware he is of how humans talk to each other and their social cues, he handles the situation pretty poorly, as expected. He and Powerplex get into a fight, and it ends up with Powerplex panicking over beating Shapesmith. He thinks in this situation that he has just killed someone for the first time, so he immediately tries to justify it by saying that Shapesmith attacked him first, and that he didn't mean for anyone to get hurt. Of course, as we see in this scene, it's actually Powerplex who attacks first, and even if he wasn't the one who was attacking first, he was still disrupting the public and is acting like a threat. But in any case, Powerplex retreats back home. He begins to become slightly unsure of his plan. However, his wife Becky keeps exacerbating and enabling the problem, making it worse as a whole. Becky reminds him of the memorial, and this triggers Scott for forgetting his sister's memorial. He freaks out and breaks down, making his electricity go everywhere that could have hit Becky or the child. Once again, foreshadowing that will come for later. When we get back to the Grayson household, Mark is unsure of going because he feels like he would impose. Mark feels responsible for what happened in Chicago, for not saving all those lives, and the destruction he caused with his battle with Omni-Man. However, there was nothing he could have done to stop it, and it's as Eve says, whether he wants to admit it or not, Mark was also a victim too, which is something I'm glad they acknowledge. Mark was lied to by his father his whole life, was beaten to near death, and then was forced to watch as his own father killed thousands. Mark not wanting to go to the memorial is not just about guilt, but also his fear of facing the anger and grief of those affected by what he thinks are his own actions. He knows that just by him being there would be seen as insulting by some, particularly those who blame him for the loss of their loved one. Mark arrives at the memorial. Oliver asks if the people here hate his father as well, but when Mark is about to reply to him, saying that this isn't a good time, Powerplex interrupts the service. He takes over, thinking he's doing justice by the victims who are affected by Omni-Man and Invincible, but he's only making it worse. He's disturbing the peace of so many people who just wanted to see the memorial to honor their loved ones, and they can no longer do that now that Powerplex has ruined it. It may seem like justice for him, but it's just disrespectful. It's not about him, and it's selfish. Invincible thinks of getting involved, but Eve takes over with Debbie, saying that he shouldn't help because the man is mentally ill, and getting involved may make things worse. After Powerplex gets captured, he escapes once again by banging his head against the wall of the prison van. We cut back to Mark and Eve, and she makes him some flowers to place by the victims. Mark responds to this by thanking her, and saying something that I mentioned earlier that is a common motif throughout the season, which is saying to Eve that he can't do this without her. Mark realizes that he never thought about all these people here. Well, he did, but he never truly realized how many there were because of Cecil covering it up as an attempt to help Mark. But he now realizes that maybe it's good to see this stuff. As I addressed earlier, him not thinking about it causes more problems, but him thinking about it also causes problems, and this episode dedicates itself to Mark learning to find that balance. Throughout all of Season 3, Mark has been challenged with his black and white worldview, and that having that philosophy won't help in a lot of situations like these, since sometimes that can only make things worse. Mark has to learn that while his philosophy is important, changing the world for the better isn't as simple as he thinks. Things are more morally ambiguous than just a bad guy being a bad guy. As we've seen him get tested throughout the season with Cecil, Oliver killing the Maulers, the future Immortal situation, Titan, and now with Powerplex, where his actions weigh over Mark because of what his father did. This episode, this moment, is the one that he realizes that he shouldn't be trying to just arrest criminals, but instead he should be helping reform them, because some criminals could just be mentally ill individuals who need help, or people who are committing crimes because they need to survive. Of course, that doesn't mean that Powerplex is his fault. It's part of Mark's character to blame himself for things that he couldn't have possibly changed. And when it comes to the Chicago incident, that is something he especially blames himself for not being able to help with. But with Powerplex, he genuinely realizes that the philosophy he has about right and wrong is willfully childish, and that he needs to approach the subject and the environment as a whole with a lot more maturity and understanding. Unfortunately, though, this will get overshadowed by the Levian Conquest confrontation that will change Mark for the worse. We return to Rey wanting to quit the Guardians, and tries to convince Rex to do the same, where she brings up how many times Rex has talked about starting a new life somewhere. And I genuinely believe that deep down, this is something that Rex wants. But because of how he grew up, he was raised to believe that he doesn't deserve that life. This entire thing is his life, and without it, he wouldn't be important. Rex questions Rey where this line of thought is coming from, and Rey admits that she had been thinking about quitting ever since she was admitted in hospital from the Lizard League incident. Rey proceeds to ask Rex if he really is happy, and Rex's only reply to this is that he doesn't deserve to be happy. He goes on telling Rey about his backstory, how his last name used to be Sloan before everything normal was wiped away from him, until he became an agent to be used by the government. That Rexplode isn't some secret identity, it is his identity, and that's all he's got. This whole conversation was beyond depressing to listen to, because Rex has the opportunity to live the life he truly and desperately wants to live. The things that he jokes about saying, that he should just quit and become a farmer or a bartender or whatnot, are most likely genuine desires on Rex's part. This whole thing of him being a nobody without powers isn't true. It's just the way he was raised to believe. He's been groomed his entire life to be a hero, and it's not until now in his childhood that someone questioned that belief. He believes that Rexplode is all he's got, and without it, he will be nothing, when in reality, he could have a fresh start and form his own identity whenever he wants. But that belief that he would be nothing without his powers was melted into him when he was young. And psychologically, when you are told something when you are young that is constantly reinforced by that person, you stop believing that is who you are. The same thing happened to Rey, but that mentality stopped when she nearly died. The contrast between the two in this situation is so sad. Rey figured out who she wants to be, when Rex has barely even started to figure it out yet, and as we will see in the very next episode, he never got the chance to. This is the ultimate tragedy of Rex, that he was never able to figure out who he was, that the government used and groomed him so much growing up that him being a superhero was the only purpose he had in life, when that's not true. His life is way more valuable than that. Rey still says that she's leaving anyway, whether he agrees to leave with her or not, and Rex acknowledges it, with them kissing on the same rooftop of where Mark and Eve agreed to start dating. When Scott returns home, he panics. He's been found out, and there isn't much time left before the GDA finds him. But Becky keeps enabling him, and that's when they come up with a plan where Scott will pretend to kidnap Becky and Jack to lure Invincible over to their location. This is terrible, morally fucked, and absurd for so many reasons that we discussed earlier. The fact that this plan was even pondered over shows how far gone these two truly are. Meanwhile, Mark meets up with Donald to obtain more information on Scott. This is because the last time he was confronted by a supervillain under similar circumstances, it was Angstrom, and him not remembering his name only pissed him off further. So Mark wanting to actually learn more about Scott makes sense, since he wants to help him in the best way possible, and cause the least amount of damage. Mark then thinks for a second that the orbs that were tracking his every movement came from Scott, but Donald puts down this idea, saying that the orbs aren't GDA property, and that Cecil wasn't lying to Mark back in episode 4. He then volunteers to meet Scott because he wants to help him, and not want him to hurt anyone else because of what he did, but finds out from Donald that not only has Scott escaped, but has taken hostages to grab his attention. It turns out that the building where he has taken Becky and Jack hostage is the same one where Gretchen and Jessica died in, and unfortunately, it's going to be the exact same one where Becky and Jack will die in too, where Invincible attempts to try and save them, but will once again be unsuccessful. You can tell that Scott has kind of lost it when he ties up his own child that doesn't even have the motor skills to walk around yet. When Mark finally arrives to confront Powerplex, Scott tries proving a point that Invincible probably doesn't even remember the lives that were taken during that day. But Invincible points out that he does remember him, that they were his sister and niece. Mark continues to try and be understanding, and even apologizes to Scott, but then he says that this doesn't give him an excuse to be hurting other people. Scott becomes so enraged by this. Invincible of all people is the one who says that he is harming others, is such an absurd concept to him that it sends him into an unbridled fury. Mark still refuses to fight him and ultimately tries to reason with Scott, but when he sees that he might kill the hostages, he tries to get them out by telling Scott that he will hurt them with the way the battle keeps going. But Scott is still in denial, and Mark makes the decision to quickly incapacitate Scott to help the hostages, with Mark making it clear that he'll help him afterward. When Invincible attempts to help the hostages, Becky spits in his face, much to his confusion, only for Powerplex to get the jump on Invincible, trying to fry him. All that hate for Invincible, that anger and vengeance, and the only thing it ended up doing was causing the deaths of the ones he loved most. Instead of getting justice and revenge, he kills the people he was fighting for, burying them in the same grave that Gretchen and Jessica were taken from him. Him doing this as a way to get justice for Jessica and Gretchen, avenging them, only to end up with more deaths, not on Invincible's hands, but his own. Powerplex screams and cries out as much as he can, making his powers worse. Mark withstands the electricity and gets closer to Scott to grab his hands. The Invincible that we've come to see this season would have most likely broke his hands or snapped them clean off, but instead of doing that, he hugs them. Mark can't bring the people back from the Chicago incident. He can't bring back his family. The only thing he can do is give a man who is in immense pain and grief a bit of comfort, contrasting to Powerplex's rage. And it's not just about comforting Powerplex either. Throughout the entire episode, Mark has had to realize that there are consequences for what he does. Unintentional consequences. He can't just treat a criminal like every other criminal. It's through this scene that Mark does confront the people he never really thought about. The collateral damage that comes from being a hero. He sees that Powerplex is just a broken man and mentally unwell, and just wants to help him in any way he can. When Invincible confronts Powerplex later in his cell, he tells him that he does remember them, and that they were the ones he tried to save. He confesses that after the incident, the only thing he could think about were the lives he didn't save, which made him actually bad at saving people, and he realizes how much of a mistake that was. This is excellent character development for Mark. It brings his entire arc full circle, where his philosophy and morality have not only been challenged, but fundamentally changed because of what happened with Powerplex. Powerplex, however, finds no comfort in this, and is still persistent on breaking out and killing Invincible, which depresses Mark when hearing this. His actions and confession were fruitless, as they did not help nor change Powerplex. They only fueled his desire to kill Invincible more. Like the Titan episode from Season 1, Mark almost learned to be understanding with criminals, and that reform is the best way to go, but he sees that when he tries to make things right, it only gets spit back in his face. It's not helped either that the Levian conquest incidents change his perspective once again, to the point where in Season 4, he will just kill criminals without hesitating if they pose a threat to the people he loves. We cut to Mark on the roof where Eve finds him, and Eve asks if they want to talk about what happened, to which Mark says nothing. He doesn't have anything to say. In Mark's head, all he can think about is how he let Scott down, how he couldn't help him, and only made the situation worse, with Scott more disturbed and mentally ill than ever. As the episode comes to a close, we see that orb again spying on Mark and Eve, as it cuts to Angstrom with multiple Invincible variants ready to attack Earth. But first, some context. In Season 3, it is revealed that Angstrom survived the attack and had a portal ready just in case something went awry during his battle with Mark. Due to the severe brain damage and trauma from getting beaten up by Mark, he's become more insane than last time and has hired different variants of Invincible to terrorize Mark's world, to make the world fear and hate Invincible by the end of it all. Continuing from the previous episode, Mark still blames himself for what happened with Powerplex. He knows it's not his fault, but still, it's really hard for Mark not to blame himself for what has occurred. It shows that he really does care about the victims of his father and the collateral that he's caused. Because of this, Eve uses this as a way to cancel dinner with her parents, but Mark asks why. She says that they're terrible and that he wouldn't understand, to which Mark retorts by teasing her, saying that he of all people wouldn't understand terrible parents. But before their conversation can continue any further, Eve gets a call from the prison that Mark is on retainer to, presumably getting told that Invincible is tearing up the place. Meanwhile, Rex helps Ray move into her new apartment, and she catches him smiling randomly. It seems that things are actually going quite decently for Rex. The relationship between Rex and Ray has improved since the last time they spoke. he's getting along with the team better. However, before Ray and Rex can take anything further, they are interrupted by a massive explosion, to which they both want to respond to, but Rex tells her to stay put, since she shouldn't just unquit on day one. Before Rex departs, they give each other a goodbye kiss, and tells her that he'll be right back. However, this is the final time they will ever see each other, and will later show that Rex died doing what he thought he was made to do, being a hero. Mark checks to see what is going on at the prison, only to see a person who looks exactly like him causing mayhem. Mark tries to figure out why he is here and who sent him, but he doesn't get much in the way of answers, so Mark incapacitates him by doing the same move that Omni-Man did to Vidor to dispose of him. However, due to the Invincible variants going around, the other heroes mistake the real Invincible for being one of the other ones causing destruction. We cut to a news report talking about the destruction and chaos that is going on. The only way they describe it is disturbing, which in turn makes the viewer feel hopeless and gives the feeling that this may be the end of the world as they know it. That feeling is only exacerbated when the reporter says,
"We'll keep broadcasting as long as we can."
Oliver tries going out to help, but Debbie stops him for a second before changing her mind and realizing that she can't keep treating him like a kid that needs to be coddled anymore, and that she needs to accept that she can't live that normal life that she was wanting anymore. Her arc is realizing that dream of hers will never happen, they will never be normal, and never were to begin with. However, it's also an opportunity for Oliver to learn to help and care for people, which changes Debbie's perspective on her philosophy and morals from the beginning of the season. Debbie's arc at the beginning of the season was that her priority are her kids first, not Earth. She says that to Cecil, then later on when we get to the Invincible War, she accepts that she too has a responsibility to Earth, and can't always protect her kids. But that doesn't mean she can't try, so while she does allow Oliver to go out and help, part of their deal is to immediately find Mark afterwards. In the meantime, Debbie will go to another location, as the other Marks may be able to find her. Meanwhile, the GDA has been overrun with an Invincible variant, and because of it, a lot of the Reanimen have been destroyed. The engineering wing is gone, and the noisemakers, as Cecil calls them, are broken. And as they come to realize that these Invincibles are not as strong as Mark, that doesn't mean they don't pose a massive threat. This scene sets up a lot, especially when it comes to Invincible later trapping Conquest. We are then introduced to a new character named Britt, a comic character, who helps by getting more reinforcements for the war. And at the same time, Oliver has clearly gained some newfound appreciation for human life as he saves this family, which makes sense, since Oliver has always had a soft spot for family. Meanwhile, Mark and Eve, and let's be honest, the whole world, have been so overwhelmed by all the Invincible variants that they don't even know what their plan of attack could be. Their only plan is attack, because they don't have time to think of a plan without risking millions of people dying whilst they do. As they continue flying, they encounter another Invincible variant. Mark and Eve try stopping him, while also going out of their way to try and protect the other heroes and civilians in the area. The variant then points out, if Mark hadn't spent time trying to protect and save lives, he would have beaten him by now. This is something that Conquest points out to Mark, which serves as a great contrast that shows a key difference between Mark and someone like the Viltrumites and Invincible variants don't have, their humanity. As the fight continues, Eve is gravely injured, and Mark is given an ultimatum. He can either save Eve or fight them. He can't do both. It's that choice that either he can be the good guy or the guy who saves the world, and he chooses the first option because Mark is inherently selfish as a person. And that's not a bad thing, it's human to feel that way, although the situation isn't as hopeless as it seemed originally, as Cecil's Reanimen come to help Mark so he can get Eve to a hospital safely. Donald sees what is going on out there and thinks that he would be better suited for combat. Cecil argues that he'd only get himself killed because Cecil does care about people, as we have established before. As much as he doesn't want to admit it, he does care about them. So inevitably, he allows Donald to go out there, because that's just who Cecil is, and that's who Donald is. We then cut to Guardians HQ to see No Gogglesable tearing up the place and beating the Guardians in an extremely sardonic manner, with some parallels to how the Viltrumites have beaten up some people in the past. For example, No Gogglesable slams Darkwing on the floor, the same way Omni-Man did when he was killing the Guardians of the Globe, and then proceeds to body slam Immortal the same way Anissa did to Mark, all while treating the whole situation as a joke as he callously roasts Shapesmith and shows just how much of a fraud a mortal can be by beating him senseless. Meanwhile, Debbie is looking for any update she can on how Mark and Oliver are doing. Even when the military are taking people to safer refuge, she still refuses to leave until it's all over and she knows her children are safe. Paul agrees to this, officially making him part of the family by deciding to stick with them through thick and thin. Before, he was relatively uncertain about what his place was in the family, but he takes Debbie's advice about showing up for them no matter what. It's a neat way to round out his character arc for the season by having him know his place in the family. He is an omni-man and he can't save the world. He's just a normal guy, and that's perfectly okay. In contrast to the comics, Paul isn't really a character. He kinda just shows up from time to time, and he never goes through any particular arc, so he's just left feeling more like Debbie's rebound, rather than someone who has a fully fledged character that we could understand why Debbie got with him to begin with. As this occurs, Mohawk Invincible has the idea of going to the Grayson household to find his mother in this universe. He attempts to lure her out by acting injured and scared, but nothing comes of this, so he flies off disappointed because he didn't get to savor the thrill of killing her again. We then see Goggles Invincible wreaking havoc over San Francisco, and is trying to kill Rex and the gang. Bulletproof tries protecting everyone from dying, but to Rex, it's clear they'd have a better chance with Bulletproof helping them escape. Rudy is worried about Amanda, and wants to try getting her to safety, which is where we see Rudy at his most vulnerable and human, when he cares for Amanda. He's panicking and acting a little illogically, as most of us would in this situation. We know that in Season 2, he tried to eliminate all fear within his system so he could be more combat effective, but this right here is the payoff to all that development in Season 2 and 3, where he acts human, not like a robot. He's scared and doesn't know what to do, so Rex volunteers to distract this Invincible as they get to safety. They are all concerned if Rex will make it or not, but Rex says that he has a plan, and that they should tell Ray that he is sorry he didn't finish helping her move. As they leave, Rex jokingly points out how they still can't tell when he's lying, showing that despite the situation, he still manages to retain that classic Rex snark he has always had. He manages to explode the floor, thinking he has finally killed him, but it only did a minuscule amount of damage to the Invincible variant. Goggles Invincible stops playing around, and takes the fight more seriously, to which he strangles Rex and threatens to skin alive every single person he loves. Although, despite the odds stacked up against Rex, he still has one thing left to explode: his entire goddamn skeleton. Rex ultimately sacrifices himself for the good of the world. What started off as a cocky, arrogant douchebag with little regard for others, quickly changed into a more selfless and caring person. While Rex never was the strongest or most super abled out of everyone, nor is he even close to being the smartest, he still is one of the most respectable heroes in the show, and gave it his all in his final moments. It's as Rex says about himself: "I'm the idiot who took you with me," his final words being,
My entire goddamn skeleton, dickhead!
Is so fitting for Rex and the person he is. He's not the most mature, and has a lot of snark, but he has a good heart deep down, and sacrificed himself so everyone else in his team could live. Before we see him eviscerated, the camera pans out to show the massive explosion on the bridge caused by Rex. This is when the song "When the Party's Over" by Billie Eilish starts playing, a fitting name for the scene we just witnessed, especially how it fits in with Rex's personality. This song is meant to work as a transition into the character's lowest points during the war. If it didn't feel hopeless before, it definitely does now. All the grief, loss, sorrow, anger, and destruction is more apparent than it ever has been with Omni-Man, and it's bleak. During the montage, we cut to Mark, still with Eve in the hospital, and is clearly conflicted. Cecil comes in and softly tells Mark that he can't be here, and that he should be out there fighting to win the war, but Mark can't. He just can't. Those other Invincibles know about this place, and could come over and kill Eve at any moment just to get to Mark if he steps out of the room for 1 second. If he stays, there's a high likelihood that people will also die. Mark is so mentally exhausted and doesn't know what to do, so in the heat of the moment, he doesn't go. Yet. But that doesn't mean that Mark isn't letting the world die. It's like he said, there are other heroes to handle it, for Mark to recuperate. It's not until the very next day does Mark go out again and stop him, He doesn't sit out the entirety of the war, he just needs time to gather himself emotionally, because whichever option he picks will have serious consequences. This type of characterization is consistent with Mark, especially in Season 2, when Mark is hesitant to go up to space because of everything going on. Except this time, this type of threat is 100 times worse, and he doesn't even get the chance this time to comprehend what is going on. This behavior continues in Season 3, where we are given multiple examples of why it is somewhat reasonable that Mark wouldn't know what to do and would rather stay with Eve for the time being. He's more dependent on her than anyone else in the season, not to mention that Eve is pretty much one of the only reasons that he doesn't completely lose himself at all. Of course, he doesn't know which option to choose, so in the heat of the moment, he decides to stay with Eve despite what Cecil says. He knows he is being selfish, but he doesn't know what else to do. Cecil then tries one final Hail Mary to get Mark out there by saying that Eve herself won't like hearing about this, but Mark still won't budge, to which Cecil leaves disappointed, running out of hope, and clearly exhausted. As he leaves, he says,
I hope you don't regret this.
in the tone of what a disappointed father would say, whereas in the comic he's way more pissed. I prefer how the show version of Cecil acts. He's clearly on the brink of running out of hope, that he can't even get mad at Mark. In a way, he maybe even understands him, and leaves defeated. It adds so much more to his character, because we've never seen Cecil so hopeless before. Usually he's on his A game, and has got his priorities in order, but you can see that he's a total wreck, and is just hoping for the best in this situation. He says that he hopes that Mark doesn't regret this, which we all know he will, and we will discuss those consequences later on. Day 3 of the war has now begun. Practically the whole world is now in ruin, with buildings collapsed, cities destroyed, and people dead. Angstrom sees this as the perfect time to enact Phase 2 of his plan. He meets up with the other Invincible variants, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't go well. However, before they get sent back to the same desert that Mark killed Angstrom in, we do learn a bit about each Mark. One of them hates coming back to this place, possibly because it reminds him of when he had to kill his own mother. One of them only wants Dimensions to take over. The completely masked Invincible is only doing this to get his mother back, whereas the maskless one is doing it because he wants William back. We'll discuss more as to why this is important near the end of the episode, but these are very interesting things to note. Cecil comes back to Mark with info on who did it, and asks if he still wants to sit it out. Mark, full of rage and sadness, chooses not to as he can't let this slide. He wants nothing more than to hit something as hard as he can. As he confronts Angstrom, he dodges his portals, learning his lesson from last time, but it gets too overwhelming for Mark, and when all hope seems to be lost, Angstrom makes the same mistake he did last time. He threatened Mark's family. This gives Mark enough strength to fight back, and overpowers Angstrom. Mark cannot comprehend that Angstrom will cause all this death and destruction just to get at him, but before he can finish his sentence, Oliver interrupts and tells Mark to kill him. Oliver remembers what Angstrom did to his mother because of his Thraxan DNA, so of course he would feel this extreme about Mark killing him. Mark realizes that Oliver has got a point. He doesn't want to kill Levy, but if he lets him live, he'll only come back and do worse and worse every single time. He simply has no other choice. But before he can even do anything, Angstrom tries escaping, but Mark grabs his hand. However, Angstrom mutilates himself before Mark can do anything further. Angstrom has escaped, and left all this destruction in his wake. Mark is understandably pissed, and so are we as the audience. All of this stuff has happened, and Angstrom doesn't even get brought to justice, which only makes us want Mark to kill Conquest even more when he arrives. But before we get to that, let's discuss Angstrom. I've seen a few people call Angstrom stupid for using the other Marks, who are way more evil, to try and eliminate this version of Mark. And I don't think people are seeing the bigger picture in this situation. Angstrom hates this version of Invincible over any other version, because this version is the one that made him into a deformity. Not to mention, he beat him basically dead in the desert, and clearly wants his revenge. Now, Angstrom hates these other versions of Invincible too, so in his mind, he can knock out two birds with one stone. He leads the Invincible variants with false promises about turning them into gods and giving them whatever they desire, so long as they destroy everyone he loves. After they do this, they turn on Angstrom quicker than he expected, but the thing is, he was never going to give them the thing they desired most to begin with. He was always going to send them to that desert because he hates them like any other Invincible. Speaking of which, I also like how the other Invincible variants contrast Mark in some way or another. They represent everything Mark worries he'll become through different aspects of his worst traits. For example, the Omni-Man Invincible variant, and the two others who lost people in their lives, whether that be William or Debbie or whoever made them go down darker paths. The fact that there are only 18 evil versions of Mark in the whole multiverse that turned out like that showcases how good of a person Mark actually is. It displays how strong his willpower is and how much Angstrom struggled just to get these 18 marks. Now that Angstrom is gone and the war is over, there is no place in sight that hasn't been trashed. It's the Chicago incident, but 1,000 times worse. But that doesn't mean it's all bad. As the news listed the cities that were destroyed by the other Invincible variants, San Francisco wasn't on the list. So Rex didn't just sacrifice himself to save his friends, he sacrificed himself to save an entire city too. But while Angstrom did get a bad ending by being forced to work for a group called the Technicians, he still won at the end of the day. Everyone now fears Invincible. Everyone thinks of the Invincible War whenever his name is brought up. The outcome of this war has been for nothing, but only to make people more afraid of Invincible. In Season 2, the Karma Police montage was all about Mark trying to prove to everyone, but most importantly himself, that he's not his father, only for it to be turned around again where people do fear him. With all the destruction and the lives taken, Mark now regrets not killing Angstrom when he was in the desert, despite all the pain he's put himself through when he thought he killed them. However, Cecil comes in to try and calm Mark down, and says something that has been a running theme throughout the entire season, that he can't blame himself for being a good person, which once again continues the motif of we can be the good guys or the guys who save the world. This way of thinking sticks with Mark, because next time when Conquest shows up, he doesn't hesitate to kill him. He doesn't bother torturing himself over what he did. In fact, the Invincible War, and especially the Conquest fight, changed his entire perspective on the matter, but that's a discussion for later in the video. What matters is that this has brought the whole world together, and while at this moment it may seem hopeless, they will rebuild. That's just how humans are. We keep going even during the toughest of times. But the thing that Cecil emphasizes most during this is that they still have Mark. This means two things: that he's glad that Mark is not evil, unlike those other Mark variants, to help. Or it could mean that after his mistake with him staying in the hospital for a day, he still went out there and fought the good fight. Mark only responds by saying, yeah, in a very somber tone. He blames himself for not being out during the action and staying inside for a good portion of it. He wasn't there when people needed him most, when everyone counted on him to be there, and he'll blame himself for that as long as he lives. Cecil tries to cheer him up a bit more by revealing that his mother and brother are still alive, but not without taking the opportunity to suggest that he should help out in New York. Mark agrees, but despite everything that has happened, Mark makes it very clear that he's never working with Cecil again. As Mark helps out in New York, he is reunited with Oliver. He's been searching all over for Mark ever since the war has started, as that was Debbie's request, and he's finally found him. But this moment is short-lived, as Mark goes back to feeling defeated and asks how they could possibly rebuild from this, which is when Powerplex catches Invincible by surprise. Not only will they have to rebuild, but it's a reminder that Invincible's reputation will need some serious rebuilding as well. Powerplex is soon apprehended, and as he's getting taken away, he questions everyone's morality of why they aren't doing anything, since this is all Invincible's fault. And while no one says or does anything, the look on everyone's faces as they stare at Invincible say it all. Mark is probably at his lowest point in the entire series. He blames himself. Angstrom did all of this to get to Invincible, and since Mark didn't stop him, he thinks that he is responsible for all of this mess. Mark has no idea how he'll deal with that thought, or how he'll cope. He has never felt this hopeless in a long time. Mark talks to Eve's comatose body about everything that's been going on when Eve's parents walk in, which is ironic. Eve was dreading Mark meeting them over dinner or something, but instead he meets them in the worst possible situation, which only makes everything more awkward, and it's not helped by the fact that Eve's father is acting like an asshole to Mark. Later, Cecil decides to regroup with everyone, and talks about how most of the heroes he knows about are out of action, missing, or presumed dead, which means they'll need the Guardians of the Globe now more than ever. Mark proceeds to ask about Rex, and Rudy responds by saying that he died. This is Mark's consequence from sitting the battle out. Because of this, Rex died. Yes, what Mark did was understandable in the moment, but that doesn't mean his actions can go without consequence. As I mentioned earlier about how either choice, whether that be leaving Eve or staying with her, would have dire consequences, and this is most certainly one of them. Cecil continues, stating that Mark should be leading the Guardians, but Mark disagrees. He isn't nearly qualified enough, and him being the face of the Guardians is probably not what the world wants to see right now. Not to mention how he nearly killed Cecil on numerous occasions. But Cecil doesn't hold that against Mark. In fact, it's another reason why he wants to hire him. Like Radcliffe, Cecil wants Mark because he's competent, he sticks up for himself, and recognizes him as the right man for the job. Like Cecil's reform, Mark going through all this is probably his reform in Cecil's head. But it's not just that. I think Cecil recognizes that it is necessary to have someone who is a good guy on the team making decisions, which is why he later says that they are the good guys. He even offers some counseling to Mark if he needs it, to which Mark responds, saying that he is the last person he wants to talk to. But after a few silent moments, he does thank him, showing that after everything they've been through, Mark still does respect Cecil to some degree, and it's not like him not accepting the role of leader of the Guardians is entirely bad, as he'll still help out if anything big comes up. Mark helps out more with rescue and recovery, and you can see that he still blames himself when seeing one of the bodies. Mark goes to a corner and needs to take a second to recuperate. He's just been through a serious deal of trauma, and hasn't even had the time to think for a second, and just when he's about to try and gather all of his thoughts, just when he tries to have a second to himself to process all this chaos and destruction,
Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
Conquest arrives. His arrival is so poorly timed that Mark doesn't even know how to react other than saying what everyone watching is thinking.
This isn't a good time.
But at the same time, Mark is so frustrated, angry, and depressed, he hasn't had a good outlet to vent all of his frustrations or found a way to cope. Not to mention, Angstrom escaped before he could even kill him, so he blames himself even more. So the only thing he wants to do is to hit something as hard as he possibly can. The season finale wastes no time. We get no cold open, just the title card, which is fittingly a Viltrumite color scheme. After a few punches, Conquest explains how he won't be telling Mark how great the Viltrumite Empire is. He is only here for one reason, and one reason only: to wreak havoc and kill everyone. Mark, in a fit of rage, throws Conquest through multiple buildings. He doesn't have to look out for other people here because the entirety of New York is basically a dead zone. All of the buildings are either damaged or abandoned, which means Mark doesn't have to worry about casualties. However, that doesn't mean he wants to stay in the city for long, as he quickly tries relocating the fight into space where there's no chance of people around to distract him. Conquest is amused by this. This is probably the first time in forever that he has had a fight that has been this exciting for him. As Mark takes the fight to space, Conquest spits out his own blood to make a little heart for Mark, only for him to shatter said heart into bits, basically saying in a non-verbal way that he's going to break Mark by killing everyone he has ever loved. But to Mark, the heart just confuses him because, admittedly, doing this mid-fight would be confusing to anyone. But before Mark has any time to react, Conquest pushes him out of space, back into the atmosphere. But Mark manages to gain the upper hand for a second. Mark, to his arrogance, proceeds to act cocky, asking Conquest if he's sure that this is going to go his way. By this point, Conquest has been merely playing with his food. Mark has seen nothing yet. So Conquest punches out one of his lenses, sending him flying through multiple buildings. Debbie sees what's happening via news report, and is in shock. Oliver sees it, and says that he can help. Debbie shouts out to call him back, but she stops herself before she says anything further. She knows that if Mark even has a chance of surviving, if the world has a chance of surviving, he's going to need Oliver by his side too. So like the last episode, Debbie tells him to keep his distance and not let him get grabbed. I won't delve too much further into her characterization, since all my key points were discussed during the Invincible War portion of the video. Oliver rushes out, and Paul comes to comfort Debbie, saying that they've been in these situations before, and will be okay. But Debbie points out that it's not like this. It was never like this. Mark at least had some chance with Omni-Man, especially with the fact that he's his father. Mark is completely screwed. This is a bloodthirsty Viltrumite who refuses to listen to any sort of reasoning, whose sole purpose is to just kill, destroy, and rain carnage over everyone. The fight continues as Mark gets brutally beaten by Conquest, all while Oliver tries catching up to them. Conquest punches Mark through the clouds the same way Omni-Man did in Season 1, Episode 8, which lands him in another city. We then see Mark do something that he hasn't really done before, other than with Alan, which is begging his opponent to stop. Even with Anissa, he would have rather died than join her, but here, we are shown just how strong this antagonist is when even Mark, someone who can really take a beating, is begging for just a few seconds to catch his breath. But Conquest isn't stopping for anybody, especially what is probably the most fun he's had in a very long time. He even sees that Mark is starting to give up a little, so he antagonizes him and pressures him into getting back into the fight, because he just doesn't want it to end yet. He even tempts Mark to fight back when he threatens to kill more people, and tells Mark that he will kill everyone he loves. This usually would make Mark want to fight back more, but Conquest is so overwhelmingly strong that there isn't much he can do. That is, until Oliver shows up. This is Mark's greater motivation to fight back. He loves his brother, and doesn't want him to get killed, so once again, he puts his all into it. Mark tries to get Oliver to leave, but before he can do anything, he is knocked around by Conquest. Conquest even taunts Mark by teasing him earlier for wanting a timeout, basically implying he could have gone one, while he would have been busy dismembering his younger brother. This line was actually foreshadowed in the Invincible War by that one Mark variant. If that wasn't enough, Conquest then mocks his Viltrumite heritage, and states that he wants to see it come out. And Conquest will see it come out. Maybe not immediately, but it will come out sooner than he thinks. Mark proceeds to headbutt Conquest, which is arguably the most effective move he's done yet, foreshadowing what he'll be doing later on. Mark tries proving himself to Conquest by hitting him over and over again, but it's of no use. After seeing how dire the situation is, and how it's an even bigger threat than the Mark variants, we have Cecil trying to gain some amount of control in the situation. He tries getting the new reanimant out there, but they simply are just not ready yet. In fact, they are so not ready that they'd take weeks to deploy, which as we know, they do not have that amount of time. What is smart is that Cecil didn't waste the opportunity with those dead Invincible variants. He's using them as the upgrade reanimant, which is such a smart thing for Cecil to do. Meanwhile, Eve has woken up from her coma and sees that Mark is on the news and immediately goes into a full rage, while Mark is getting beaten even harder. As Conquest is getting a little bored of his toy, he once again taunts Mark and questions why he was even sent here, considering how easy but fun this place is to conquer. Of course, Conquest and we as the audience know why he was sent here, because of the lack of Viltrumites there are, but Conquest says all this to demoralize Mark, in hopes of making him feel even more disheartened. If this place is easy to conquer for him, and doesn't even pose a challenge, then what chance does Mark have? Especially if Conquest is wondering why he was even sent here. Conquest continues to taunt Mark, and tells him that he saw his father before he left, which is most likely true, but he then tells Mark that he's dead. While he probably believes this to be true, we know that it's not. This is once again only said to Mark to try and get a rise from him, but also to make him feel more despondent. Oliver then interrupts them both, and Mark tries protecting him, but it's clear that Conquest is bored of Mark because of the fact that he isn't fighting back as much, so he bitch slaps him away and tells him to take a break while he kills his brother. He starts to tear Oliver apart in an extremely vile manner. In fact, it's downright disturbing seeing him brutally mutilate what is just a kid. Mark can barely see and focus straight, but all he knows is that his brother is going to die if he doesn't do anything, so he once again tries his best. Cecil gets Oliver on a transport so he doesn't die, and meets up with Eve. He tells her that he's even stronger than Nolan, as a way to discourage her from going out, but Eve tells Cecil that she's all he's got, and that she may be his only ace up his sleeve. Cecil knows what she wants him to do, but really doesn't want her to ask him for permission, since he knows what his answer is going to be. He knows how pissed Mark will be if she dies, and he knows that another life will be on his conscience if she dies, but he sends her out anyway, because what other option does he have? Conquest then holds Mark, and as he does this, we see a beach in the distance. When they arrive, Conquest parallels the train scene from Season 1, but 100 times worse, as it's not just a train, but an entire city he's rammed through. Conquest then takes Mark up to the mountains, similar to what Omni-Man did. As Mark starts to beat on Conquest again, he then sees something he wishes that he didn't. Eve. We've already established that Mark can't bear the thought of losing her, but he can't do anything about it. Eve cares about Mark, and it's like she says in episode 5 of season 3, they're in a relationship, and they help each other out no matter what. Mark attempts to stop Eve from engaging in the battle, but in the process, he gets his leg broken in two. Eve steps into the fight and pulls off moves that we've never seen her do throughout the entire series. Of course, the reason for this is because it's been established since practically the beginning of Season 1 that Eve gets tired from creating or doing too much with her powers, and that much is clear here. While she does do a bit of damage to Conquest, she is clearly getting exhausted fast, and it isn't long before she gets killed. Mark catches Eve as she's falling, and Mark desperately pleads that he can't do this without her, having the motif come full circle. This is then continued by Mark saying that he can't live without her. Mark is in complete shock and disbelief at this moment. He is so helpless to the point where he starts crying out for Cecil of all people to help. Because Cecil has some amount of power in the world, Mark is hoping, hell, he's praying that he can do something. But Cecil is only human, and there's only so much he can do. In this moment, Mark is all alone. During this moment, Conquest begins to understand why Mark cares for these people, because of how pathetic and weak they are. Conquest doesn't understand in the way Nolan does. He understands it in the way a psychopath would see it, which is what he is. Conquest continues to ridicule Mark, saying that he should probably say those final words to her before she dies, but it's too late. Eve has passed, and now Mark is focused on one thing: Conquest. This is Mark's great motivator. This is what drives him. Conquest proceeds to thank Mark, and says that he has no clue what Mark did to piss them off so bad, to the point where he gets no parameters that come with this job, unlike most of the other ones Conquest has done. But he thanks Mark, because he gets to go all out and destroy everything. The reason why the Viltrumites don't care about Conquest going loose on Earth is because if Nolan of all people, one of Viltrum's best soldiers, was affected by this planet, then it poses a threat to all the Viltrumites as a whole. Mark is now more motivated than he ever has been to kill Conquest, to the point where he says,
I can see the future. You don't live to see tomorrow.
Conquest pissed him off so much, to the point where Mark isn't just committed to killing Conquest, he is telling him this like it's an inevitability, delivering one of the coldest lines in the entire show. This is where Mark officially starts giving it his all. He breaks bones and gives all of his will to kill Conquest. As Mark is beating him up, he sees Eve alive, but not for long. Conquest won't allow him to focus on anything but him, and you can tell throughout the fight, Conquest is a little bit worried. He even shows a bit of fear when Mark hurts him badly, which is when he decides that enough is enough, and that now is the time to kill Mark. But before he does, he tells Mark his biggest secret.
I am so lonely. All the other Viltrumites are scared of me. No one talks to me. No one wants to be my friend. They think I am unstable. They send me from planet to planet committing atrocities in their name. And as I get better at it, they fear me more and more. I am a victim of my own success. Conquest. I don't even get a real name. Only a purpose. I am capable of so much more, and no one sees it. Some days I feel so alone I could cry, but I don't. I never do, because what would be the point? Not a single person in the entire universe would care. Take it to your grave.
The monologue takes such a depressing look into his character, revealing so many layers about him that make Conquest more than just your average run-of-the-mill ruthless villain. Throughout the battle, it's clear that Conquest's respect for Mark grows. Initially, Mark is just another toy for Conquest to crush in the name of the Viltrumite Empire, but over time, Conquest begins to understand just how much of a threat Mark is. Not only has Mark survived a fight with Nolan, but he even turned him into a traitor. Mark's ability to push back against the Empire in such a personal way puts him at a level that is far more dangerous than any other enemy to the Empire. Conquest realizes at this moment why Viltrumites fear Mark's power in the same way they fear him. It's a chilling recognition, but one that earns Conquest's respect, a level of respect that he probably never thought he'd feel for anyone. But what really sets Conquest's character apart is the vulnerability he shows in his monologue. The line, "Take it to your grave," stands out to me especially because it completely removes any doubt that Conquest is being sincere. Normally he'd mock or taunt Mark here, but the fact that this is the last thing Mark hears from him shows a different side to Conquest. He's not just toying with Mark, he's expressing something real and authentic. Conquest's loneliness is almost palpable in this moment. In the Viltrumite Empire, it's been established that there is no room for genuine connection, only domination and control. Conquest is a byproduct of that world, and even admits that he's suffering for it. His words about being a victim of success are a reflection of his power, and the fear it generates have left him isolated and alone. What is truly beautiful about how Conquest's vulnerability comes through in the middle of a fight, in a moment where he is supposed to be this macho and masochistic figure, he admits to being completely alone. He rants about how no one talks to him, how the Viltrumites fear him, and that he's been reduced to a weapon for the Empire's cause. He doesn't even have a real name, just a label that defines him. It's just as disturbing as it is depressing that the only time Conquest can admit these feelings is when he's about to kill someone, that the brutality of a fight is the only way he can form a connection with another living being. This speaks volumes about the deeper problem with the Viltrumite Empire. The entire system is built around power, conquest, and survival, to the point where it leaves soldiers, like Conquest, fostering a mindset of toxic masculinity. They're not taught how to form relationships or experience real human connection. They're raised to be killing machines instead of people, which explains why Nolan was converted. Conquest is so emotionally starved that the only connection he can have with someone is in the brief moments before killing them. This entire monologue adds a layer of depth to his character compared to his comic counterpart that makes him more than just an antagonist. He's a victim of the empire he serves. His longing for connection, despite being misplaced, humanizes him in a way that makes him so intriguing as a character. It's this emotional emptiness that makes Conquest so compelling, and his final words to Mark, "Take it to your grave," is the cost of living in such an isolating environment, founded on fear and brutality. However, before Conquest gets the chance to kill Mark, Eve suddenly blasts Conquest, showing that when Mark and Eve are working together, they are at their most powerful. Mark can't do this alone. He needs to rely on people, even if it means it will hurt him in the long term. After giving it her all, she collapses, and Conquest gets back up, with most of his flesh peeled off. Conquest says that he still has more than enough fight in him for Mark, but Mark says that he doesn't have nearly enough, showing that his love for Eve is stronger than anything Conquest has inside of him. That love conquers all, and even though Conquest is defeated, he still doesn't cower in fear. He answers Mark when he asks if he is enjoying himself. He responds by saying that he takes the good with the bad, truly showing just how psychotic and masochistic he is. This answer obviously angers Mark more, sending him into a primal state. He headbutts Conquest over and over again, where you can really feel each impact. Mark's body is completely destroyed, but this is the moment where his mind breaks. Mark is following Nolan's advice. He isn't thinking, he's acting. Mark has officially stopped holding back entirely, and you can see why he's been holding back for the majority of the show. And in this moment, Mark has now turned into his dad. He has switched from being one of the good guys to one of the guys who saves the world, no matter the cost. That frame of Mark with his mouth open, covered in blood, says it all. The brutality of it is disturbing. Mark, in a bloodied stupor, crawls toward Eve. Mark isn't thinking about anything else in this moment, but to be with her. In a way, it calls back to the second episode, when he said that when he thought he was gonna die, all he could think about was her, and the fact that he may never see her again. As he gets closer, he calls out to Eve, to which they are both relieved to see each other alive. That is until they lose consciousness, where we get this spectacular shot, showing that love triumphs over all, and if it weren't for the two of them being there, they would have died. Not to mention the fact that they are shaped like a yin and yang, showing that symbolically, one cannot live without the other, and serves to balance out each other, fully displaying the power of love, and no matter what happens, they'll always be there for each other. When Cecil finally arrives, with as many of the heroes he can gather, he sees the fight is already over. Cecil had no clue if Mark would have survived the encounter. In fact, he probably thought Mark was dead, but when seeing this, it's clear that Cecil has gained a lot of respect for Mark, and has clearly underestimated his abilities. Mark wakes up in a hospital, next to Eve cuddling beside him, and it's clear that he's happy to see her. What happened wasn't a dream, she is still alive. All of this is interrupted by Debbie when she comes in and apologizes to Mark about everything. She never knew what kind of life she would be giving her own son, the amount of pain and suffering he would be faced with day in and day out, reflecting a lot of her guilt, regret, and helplessness as a mother. She has endured an immense emotional trauma, first from Nolan's betrayal, and then from witnessing Mark's repeated brutalization at the hands of the Viltrumites. This guilt is also compounded by Oliver's involvement. Debbie allowed him to go help Mark, only for him to get seriously injured. But her apology to Mark is not just about Oliver. It's also about how powerless she feels in the face of the violence constantly threatening her family. She raised Mark with the hope that he could be a hero, but seeing him nearly die time and time again forces her to question whether she has, in some way, failed him by not being able to protect him from this life. Serving as a contrast to Nolan, as he saw Mark's suffering as a necessary step in shaping him into a Viltrumite warrior, Debbie sees it as a mistake that she wishes she could have spared him from. She never wanted Mark to endure this kind of pain, and for that, she blames herself. But Mark reassures her that everything she did right. Mark was raised correctly. He's not like one of those variants he fought, and despite his compromised morals, he still has a good heart, and that will never change. Cecil comes in after hearing Mark awaking from his coma, and want to thank Mark, but before he can get any more words out, Mark immediately asks where Conquest is. He wants to take no chances. He wants to make sure he can never come back like Angstrom did. Cecil proceeds to show him the body, and after assumedly using his super hearing to check for a pulse, he takes things a step further and orders Cecil to burn the body, because even if he thinks he's dead, he doesn't want to take any chances on the matter. But you can tell that Cecil is reluctant and regretful, because while he knows that would be the right thing to do, he also knows that's not the kind of person he is. He's the type of guy who wants to save the world, which is why he's going to use Conquest to experiment and interrogate him to learn more about the Viltrumite Empire. After what has supposedly been a few days, we transition to Rex's funeral. Robot talks about how selfless he was, and sacrificed himself for noble reasons, and proceeds to make an announcement stating that he has officially changed his name to Rex, so his memory can live on. As he closes out his speech to Rex, Amanda is proud of him for getting through it, but Robot is on the verge of tears, and admits if it weren't for his drone, he wouldn't have been able to get through it, showing how human Rex has become now in comparison to the beginning of the show. This name change is not only to honor Rex, but is the beginning of a new chapter in Robot's book. Whether that chapter will be good or bad is unknown, but it is a fresh start. Eve takes her turn and talks about how Rex was her first everything, and when you know someone for that long, and you are that close and intimate with them, it doesn't matter how badly the relationship ends, it still hurts. She loves Mark, but that doesn't mean she never cared for Rex, and the fact that she never got to even say goodbye to him, that she never got to hang out with the new Rex, that hurts her, because in a way, she probably feels like she let him down, or wasn't there for him enough, even though she was, and Rex himself knew it too. Mark attempts to comfort her, but he can't help but smile because she is still alive. After all the torment Mark has gone through, with the countless lives lost, even if he gets one win, that's all that matters. After everything Mark has been through, he deserves to be happy about that, even if the timing is a tad inappropriate. But this is just as emotionally overwhelming for Eve too. She's so glad that Mark is here. After the funeral, they go back to Mark's bedroom, where they both get down to, release their stress. I like the detail that Mark blushes when he sees Eve naked, which could be a nod to the comics when he notices Eve's boobs got bigger when she came back to life. But in any case, it all seems like the season ends on a happy note, despite the tragedy, ending on Mark and Eve being together. Except, you're not buying it, are you? No, it wouldn't be an Invincible finale without a depressing end, which is when a montage plays, setting up many future plotlines for the next season, set alongside the 9 Inch Nails song, Every Day is Exactly the Same, and just like any other song that is utilized in Invincible, the meaning of the lyrics are extremely important when describing the plot and or characters. The song starts off with its first verse. I believe I can see the future, 'cause I repeat the same routine. I think I used to have a purpose. Then again, that might have been a dream. I think I used to have a voice. Now I never make a sound. I just do what I've been told. I really don't want them to come around. Oh no. The first verse is partly a reference to Mark's speech to Conquest about how he can see the future, and that he doesn't live to see tomorrow. However, if we look at it on a deeper level, the entirety of the first verse represents Mark's repetitive struggle. He is in a loop of constantly fighting and losing the people he loves, only for him to further question his morality as a hero. No matter how much good he tries doing, he's trapped in a repetitive cycle of violence. he realizes that by the end of the episode, nothing changes. Evil continues, more people die, and he will always be fighting another villain. Whether that be Conquest or Levy, they are all the same to him. This idea in the song is continued when the chorus come up repeating the same line over and over again, saying, "Every day is exactly the same. There is no love here, and there is no pain. Every day is exactly the same." The second verse comes up with some of the most important lyrics in the song, starting with, "I can feel their eyes are watching, in case I lose myself again." This line reflects the pressures placed on Mark by both his family and the general public, as he grapples with his Viltrumite heritage, his generational trauma, and his responsibility to Earth. Mark often feels like he's constantly being observed and judged. The eyes watching could symbolize the general public, or his friends and family. Mark is aware that if he loses himself, or makes mistakes, there will be consequences, for both him and the people around him. "Sometimes I think I'm happy here. Sometimes yet I still pretend." This line is pretty easy to interpret. Mark is rarely happy, and starts to question if he's truly happy with the life he's leading. The pretending part is key here. Mark may put on a false bravado, or act like everything is fine, but deep down, he is still struggling with his purpose, the violence he's forced to participate in, and the burden placed on him by the entire planet to protect him. In its final two lines, the song states, "I can't remember how this got started. Oh, but I can tell you exactly how it will end." These final lines of the song tell us about Mark's realization about the path he's gone on, particularly with his father, that was set into motion long before he understood the full extent of it. His life has been shaped by forces beyond his control, like his Viltrumite heritage and his father's influence. While he may not fully understand how he ended up on this path, he does have an understanding where it's leading. So while the specifics of how things began may be unclear, the inevitability of what will happen next will stick in his mind for the foreseeable future. The entire song as a whole encapsulates Mark Grayson's mindset, where his hope is constantly challenged by the clashing mindset that war and suffering will never end, where he is destined to be on this path before he was born, and that responsibility and pressure is a burden to him, as he has no idea who he wants to be as a person and hero. Mark's character arc comes to a close with him checking on Oliver and admitting to him that he was right about what he said earlier in the season. He's dead set on his new philosophy, that if anyone threatens the people he loves, he won't hesitate to kill them. This is not a happy ending, as Mark is no longer abiding by a no-kill rule, and now finally sees it as a necessity, and will have a hard time of drawing a line of when it's necessary and when it isn't. Instead of learning from this experience with Powerplex, Angstrom and Conquest have effectively changed him for the worst, and we will see the consequences of that echo out throughout the next season. What once began as an effort to be better and to rise above his violent Viltrumite heritage slowly falls apart as the weight of responsibility, trauma, and the internal conflicts within himself slowly but surely breaks him. Just when Mark was about to learn and grow from his previous eras after Powerplex, Angstrom and Conquest had broken him to the point where his self-restraint snaps, showing us a disturbing part of Mark's mind that he had tried so hard to suppress in Season 2, and now Season 3. Mark's fall from grace this season displays to us how all the pressure surrounding Mark can break him, and all that remains is a person whose control is completely shattered, with his future uncertain. Thank you for watching. This video has been a long time coming, and I had no idea how to approach this season, due to just the sheer amount of content to analyze. So I hope I did at least a decent job at doing it. I was getting asked at a fairly frequent rate by many of you if I was ever going to make an Invincible Season 3 video, which was my bad for not saying if I'd ever make a follow-up video to my Season 2 analysis. I will be making more of these Invincible videos, and whenever a new season comes out, I'll cover it. So if you like my Invincible videos, now you have something to look forward to on an annual basis. I'd also like to thank my good friend Stir for helping out with some parts of the video, and if you'd like to check him out, he's got his own YouTube channel and other socials that will be linked in the description below. I'd also like to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Just thank you for supporting my Invincible Season 2 video. The amount of comments or messages I had received from people who loved my Invincible video was absolutely insane and super sweet of you. And I'm gonna be real with y'all. Last year I was not in a good place. My mother and best friend had passed away the same week as each other, and I didn't have anything at the time to help other than Invincible. And the more I watched of season 2, the quicker it became a comfort show for me, and was something that I really needed when it came out. The character of Mark Grayson is such a genuine and real character, and is someone whom I relate to in many different ways. But the thing that stood out to me about him most was no matter what happened to him, he always got back up. He always kept going, which in turn made me want to keep going. I'm aware that this was probably the last thing you were expecting to hear during an Invincible analysis, but I really wanted to express how much this show means to me, and how all of you finding my Invincible Season 2 video insightful or interesting, or whatever you were able to get from it, made me so happy. So once again, thank you. But in any case, thank you once again for watching. This video was a long time in the making. It took a good long while to make, and if you made it all the way through, thank you so much. That means the world to me. If you're not already, then you should like, subscribe, comment if you enjoyed the video. I have a Discord if you want to interact with the community. It's a very chill place, and if you're looking for somewhere to talk about media or whatever, then you'll definitely have a place there. Other than that, my socials are all down in the description, Twitter, Letterboxd, all that good stuff. So thank you so much for watching, hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care. Bye.